Chapter 45:14. The second palace master borrowed the power of heaven, earth and heaven way to attack, while Ji Tianxing used the same power to resist. Under the earth-shattering collision, a shock wave that could destroy the heavens and the earth erupted, carried with it billions of shards of divine light and exploded in all directions. Tens of thousands of miles of heaven and earth collapsed, turning into desolated ruins. Even the space was fragmented. Ji Tianxing was, after all, slightly weaker than the second palace master. He was blasted tens of thousands of miles away and smashed into the ruins. He was slightly injured. His face was pale and blood flowed out of his nose and mouth. After climbing out of the ruins, he could not use his divine power smoothly, and his invisible state was temporarily removed. However, this injury did not affect him. After he used his power to suppress the chaotic inner breath, he recovered to normal. He who had merged with the world of 5 elements was almost immortal. The second palace master raised his eyebrows and narrowed his eyes. He stared at Ji Tianxing, who had revealed his original form, and memorized his appearance and spiritual aura. He had heard from the fourth palace master that the young god emperor was gifted, powerful, and had many tricks up his sleeve. However, after fighting with Ji Tianxing and seeing Ji Tianxing's tricks, the second palace master paid more attention to this person. In particular, this young god emperor came from the god emperor's realm and had a grudge against the Prajna god emperor. His identity and background were quite mysterious. While the second palace master was still thinking and speculating, Ji Tianxing had already returned to normal. He cast a spell to enter the invisible state and continued to fly toward the east. Swoosh! Seeing Ji Tianxing's figure disappear and sensing that he was escaping toward the east, the second palace master hurriedly collected his thoughts and sped up to chase after him. Then the two began to chase high in the sky. Ji Tianxing teleported 20,000 miles every time, but the second palace master teleported more than 30,000 miles every time. The distance between the two kept closing. When the second palace master caught up with Ji Tianxing, he attacked mercilessly. Every time this happened, Ji Tianxing could only stop running and use all his strength to cast a spell to resist. The same story played out over and over again, and the results were similar each time. Ji Tianxing only used all his strength to resist and did not counterattack. Otherwise, he would be entangled by the second palace master. However, because of this, he was always at a disadvantage and was either injured or forced back by the second palace master. 1 or 2 minor injuries did not affect Ji Tianxing at all. However, after this situation continued for 4 hours, Ji Tianxing's injuries continued to pile up. In the end, his injuries worsened and began to affect his combat prowess. Fortunately, the two of them had chased for so long that they had already flown 30 million miles away. At this point, they had already left the Kongming Temple's sphere of influence and entered an unknown, desolate area. The world was filled with danger. Not only were there all kinds of powerful murderers attacking and harassing, there were also all kinds of folded spaces, spatial vortexes, and traps formed by the divine power of heaven and earth. Ji Tianxing and second palace master were strong enough to avoid the dangers and ignore the god king ferocious beasts. However, despite nearly 1,000 desolate race god kings chasing with all their might, they were unable to catch up to the 2 god emperors. The distance between them was widening. With the second palace master's orders, they could not give up the pursuit without permission. They could only continue heading east. This resulted in the group of nearly 1,000 desolate race god kings being pulled apart to tens of thousands of miles. The strongest desolate race god kings were at the front, while the weaker ones were in the middle. The weakest ones were at the back of the group. As such, when they left the Kongming Temple's sphere of influence and entered an unknown, dangerous area, they were quickly met with all kinds of obstructions and dangers. There were constantly desolate race god kings who were severely injured. There were even some who died under the attacks of the ferocious beasts or perished in the dangerous traps and dangers. If these desolate race god kings had seen Ji Tianxing with their own eyes and confirmed their target, it would be fine. Even if they experienced all kinds of dangers, they would definitely overcome the difficulties and carry out the orders to pursue Ji Tianxing. However, they had never seen Ji Tianxing before. Many of them even thought that the second palace master was acting. Hence, many of the desolate race god kings grumbled and began to slack off. Maybe if they continued the pursuit, they would be able to catch up to Ji Tianxing and the second palace master in about 12 hours. However, with everyone slacking off, it would be very difficult for them to catch up to Ji Tianxing. Unknowingly, Ji Tianxing's potential threat had been reduced by more than half. 6 hours later, Ji Tianxing and the second palace master pursued for 40 million miles before they gradually entered the depths of an unknown region. This was truly a desolate and uninhabited place. Very few desolate race beings came here. Even though there were desolate race god-king experts who had come here in the past to explore and seek treasures, most of them ended up carelessly or even lost their lives here. The scenery and terrain of this region was very different from the Kongming Temple's sphere of influence. In the colorful sky, there were gorgeous clouds and flames that shot into the sky. There were also various kinds of fog that shrouded the area. The mountains and lands were in an extremely primitive state. There were all kinds of ferocious beasts, divine beasts and flying birds everywhere. Towering mountain peaks stood tall, but there were often half-cliffs that looked like they had been cleaved by knives or axes. Upon careful observation, one would realize that most of them had been damaged by the energy that leaked out from the battle between experts, leaving behind destructive marks. Primitive forests covered the mountains and lands, but they were separated by the flowing rivers. Between the mountain peaks and under the cliffs, there were remnant spatial rifts that folded into a crystal-like appearance. They were dazzling and blurry but also extremely dangerous. If any ignorant ferocious beasts or flying birds passed by and accidentally entered those spatial rifts or vortexes, they would instantly disintegrate and turn to dust. In the surrounding mountain ranges, there were waves of beast roars and loud commotion. Maybe it was some god-king realm ferocious beasts and divine beasts that were fighting over territory or treasures. The various divine beasts here were in an uncivilized and primitive state. They were filled with wildness and aggression. However, they were blessed with unique conditions. They had obtained powerful strength and all kinds of powerful divine powers. Even though they were god-emperor experts like Ji Tianxing and the second palace master, the ferocious beasts were not afraid of them. They even took the initiative to attack and invade. Of course, their fates were tragic. Ji Tianxing and the second palace master just had to wave their hands and shoot out a few divine light blades, dismembering the ferocious beasts. Such powerful means could intimidate a portion of the ferocious beasts and divine beasts, but it also stimulated the ferocious nature of many ferocious beasts. They no longer rashly attacked alone. Instead, they attacked the two of them in groups. Ji Tianxing and the second palace master not only had to fight each other, they also had to resolve the attacks of the ferocious beasts at any time. The second palace master was still all right. He had great strength and a stable attitude. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was in a sorry state. Not only were his clothes tattered and stained with blood, his hair was in a mess. He was still in a state of light injuries, but his combat strength had decreased. It was even more difficult for him to fight the second palace master. However, all of this was within Ji Tianxing's expectations. He calculated that the 1,000 desolate race god kings would not arrive in a short period of time. Hence, he stopped running and began to fight the second palace master. Of course, he would use his trump card, the Bo-Ri God Emperor, at the critical moment. No matter how scheming the second palace master was, he would never have expected that the Bo-Ri God Emperor would join forces with him in battle. Chapter 45:15. Rumble. Amidst the deafening noise, Ji Tianxing and the second palace master were in the midst of a fierce battle high in the sky. Both of them were using all their divine powers and secret techniques as they fought fiercely. Hundreds of divine powers and tens of thousands of resplendent divine lights collided with each other, producing dazzling light and shadow. Shockwaves that could destroy the heavens and earth exploded one after another. Previously, Ji Tianxing had been running and being chased by the second palace master. His injuries were worsening and his fighting strength was weakening. But now Ji Tianxing did not have to worry about the thousands of desolate race divine kings. He could focus on fighting the second palace master. Even if he was still not the second palace master's match, he could at least be on par with the second palace master and would not be injured for a short period of time. After 100 breaths of time, the two of them had exchanged dozens of blows. Ji Tianxing gradually grasped the second palace master's background and the divine powers and secret techniques that he was good at. The second palace master also grasped Ji Tianxing's true fighting strength and the divine powers and secret techniques that he was good at. He had even seen Ji Tianxing's trump card before. Finally, the second palace master and Ji Tianxing clashed and forced Ji Tianxing to retreat thousands of miles away. Taking this opportunity, the second palace master decisively chose to pursue and attack. With the momentum of a storm, he unleashed his most ferocious power and attacked Ji Tianqing with all his might. Previously, when he was fighting Ji Tianqing, he used 70% of his strength and 30% of his strength. This was to prevent future troubles and to have room for change. But this time he believed that he had grasped Ji Tianqing's strength and methods. Hence he could no longer wait. He unleashed all his strength to attack Ji Tianqing, hoping to hit him in one hit. However, the second palace master did not know that he was not the only one waiting for this opportunity. In fact, Ji Tianqing was also waiting for this opportunity. Seeing the second palace master charging at him with all his strength, a cold light flashed in his eyes. He unleashed all his strength without holding back and condensed a huge defensive shield. Infinite Sky of Chaos. This 5-colored light shield that had a radius of 1,000 feet was condensed from the divine power of heaven and earth within 1,000,000 miles. It also contained Ji Tianqing's divine power, nomological power and heavenly way power. Could be said to be his strongest defensive stance. He knew that if he did not use all his strength, he would not be able to block the second palace master's strongest attack. No matter how many plans and ideas he had, if he was heavily injured by the second palace master in one move, he would not be able to use them. Therefore, in this counterattack plan, what he needed to do was to resist with all his might and ensure that he was unharmed. As for taking the opportunity to kill the second palace master, he would leave it to Emperor God Pan Ri Boom. In the next moment, the second palace master's body was wrapped in 5-colored divine light. He put his palms together and slashed out a divine golden light that could split the sky and destroy everything. It struck Ji Tianqing's defensive shield. An earth-shattering boom erupted, shaking the heavens and earth for 100,000 miles, causing a terrifying earthquake. Boom. God. God. Divine sky. God. Of. This injury was not too serious and did not affect his strength much. To Ji Tianqing, this outcome was completely acceptable to him. Because before the divine golden light came down, he had already opened the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower and let the God Emperor attack. At that moment there was a flash of white light. Bo Ri Divine Emperor, who had been waiting for a long time, suddenly charged out of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. He held a 3-foot-long crimson divine sword in his hand and charged toward the second palace master. Although the God Emperor was injured and had not recovered much after recuperating in the Nirvana Sea of Flames for so long. But her strength was still there, and she was waiting for an exhausted enemy to attack the second palace master. She had accumulated the greatest amount of divine power, all for this gorgeous and terrifying sword strike. Whoosh! The crimson divine sword gathered endless divine power of heaven and earth, nomological power and heavenly way. It condensed into a dazzling 7-colored sword radiance that pointed at the second palace master's vital point. Wherever the sword radiance pointed, space froze and the sky collapsed. Dense black cracks appeared. The second palace master instantly sensed danger and even sensed that death was coming. When his consciousness discerned that the person who attacked him was actually Great Wisdom Emperor God, who had been defeated by Ji Tianqing previously, he subconsciously opened his eyes wide. Aren't they enemies? Why would she help him? As this thought flashed through his mind, the second palace master was shocked. His heart trembled with fear and he felt both fear and confusion. This was too shocking and unbelievable. Ji Tianqing had provoked the Qin Yu Hall and the God Emperor by himself. In the end, he had destroyed the entire God Emperor and defeated the God Emperor. This had already happened. Logically speaking, the God Emperor and Ji Tianqing should be irreconcilable enemies. How could the two of them work together? The second palace master could not understand and did not dare to believe. But now was not the time to think about this problem. The most important thing was to avoid the God Emperor's attack and think of a way to protect himself. If it had been a breath ago, the second palace master would have held back 30% of his strength in case of an accident. But now he was attacking with all his strength. He wanted to kill Ji Tianqing with one blow. He did not hold back at all. He was not on guard at all. Ji Tianqing had been chased to this point, yet he could still plot against him so insidiously and give him a fatal blow at the critical moment. Insidious and despicable bastard. The second palace master knew that he could not avoid the God Emperor's sword. He was full of helplessness and anger. He could not help but roar and curse Ji Tianqing fiercely. In the next moment, a loud, dull sound drowned out the second palace master's roar. Bang! The sword radiance condensed by the crimson divine sword pierced the second palace master's back. It instantly penetrated his protective divine light and pierced his divine body. Puff! The sword radiance pierced his back and came out of his chest. It was still blooming with dazzling light. Scorching hot blood spurted out from the wound and exploded into a cloud of blood mist in the sky. Originally, the God Emperor's sword was fast, accurate, and ruthless. It was the essence of Kenshin's swordsmanship. It was aimed at the second palace master's heart. But the second palace master was not a useless person. Even if he could not avoid the sword, he could make a crucial change at the most dangerous moment. He manipulated his internal organs and moved them. Only then did he barely avoid the sword. The incomparably sharp sword radiance brushed past his heart. It only injured his heart, meridians, divine bones, and so on. It did not cause any fatal injuries. What was more, after the second palace master was hit by the sword, he could suddenly burst out with violent divine power and fiercely blast the God Emperor behind him. Bang! Dazzling divine light burst out. Not only did it shake the crimson divine sword out, but it also shook the God Emperor until he spat out blood and flew hundreds of miles away. Plop! The God Emperor fell into the ruins with his face full of blood. Smoke and dust filled the air. Most of his body was covered by yellow soil and rubble. He looked very miserable. She was already seriously injured. After using all her strength to stab with the sword, she had almost used up all her strength. Now that she was injured by the second palace master, her injuries worsened. Her aura became very weak. Chapter 45:16. The Prajna God Emperor was heavily injured and on the verge of fainting. However, she had also completed her mission. She had severely injured the second palace master and almost destroyed his body. The second palace master was furious. He immediately turned around and charged at the Prajna God Emperor. He wanted to use his divine skill to tear her to pieces. However, all of this was within Ji Tianqing's calculations and control. Before the second palace master could kill the Prajna God Emperor, he had already used his trump card to attack the second palace master. Sword of Annihilation. With a furious roar, he held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands. He unleashed all of his power and swung his sword without any regard for the consequences. This sword contained endless power of the world, as well as Ji Tianqing's divine power, precepts, and heavenly way. Its power reached its peak. Up until now, this was still Ji Tianqing's most powerful divine skill. It was almost unbeatable. Unless the opponent's strength was much higher than his, no one could stop it. As soon as the Sword of Annihilation appeared, the second palace master was locked on by the sword will. His movements became sluggish and his face stiffened. His eyes were filled with fear. Although he knew that Ji Tianqing was very cunning, he did not expect that this was Ji Tianqing's chain of plans. The Prajna God Emperor's sudden attack was only the first step of the plan. Moreover, Ji Tianqing had been hiding his strength all this time. He had only revealed his true strength and methods at this moment. The power of that sword was even more terrifying than the Prajna God Emperor's attack. It truly made the second palace master feel the aura of death. At this critical moment, the second palace master could only give up on killing the Prajna God Emperor. He decisively chose to block Ji Tianqing's attack. He used his divine skill with all his might and took out an ancient bronze mirror to block in front of him. The modeled bronze mirror looked like it had been eroded by tens of thousands of years. It had become simple and unadorned. Under the control of the second palace master's divine power, the bronze mirror turned into a huge barrier that blocked in front of him. Even though this bronze mirror looked mediocre, it didn't have any powerful energy or aura fluctuations. However, it was the second palace master's natal divine weapon, an emperor divine weapon that originated from the primordial era. Under normal circumstances, the second palace master would not use this bronze mirror unless he had no other choice. Because this bronze mirror was linked to his life and could not be separated. If this bronze mirror was damaged or destroyed by a powerful enemy, then even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. At this moment, the second palace master could no longer hide his strength in the face of the unfathomable sword of annihilation. He could only use the bronze mirror to block it. Boom! With a deafening boom, the Armageddon sword, which was tens of thousands of feet long, slammed into the copper mirror with destructive power. The violent impact carried with it billions of shards of divine light and transformed into a five-colored torrent that spread out in all directions, sweeping across 100,000 miles of heaven and earth. As an emperor-level artifact, the bronze mirror was naturally unparalleled in strength. However, it was still unable to withstand the explosive impact and was sent flying by the Armageddon sword. It rolled and smashed thousands of miles away. The second palace master was also shaken. Many of his bones and meridians were ruptured. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices and he groaned in pain. His injuries worsened. Of course, the Armageddon sword's power was exhausted and it collapsed. It exploded into billions of shards of divine light and dissipated into the world. This exchange of blows gave Ji Tianxing a deeper understanding of his own combat strength. The second palace master was a super expert who had condensed 6 Taoist rhymes. Logically speaking, he should be invincible. However, he could still injure the second palace master when he unleashed his full strength and used his most powerful killing move. Although there was some luck involved, and there was also the Prajna God Emperor's surprise attack that injured the second palace master first. However, this was enough to prove that as long as Ji Tianxing's strength increased a little more, he would have a chance to contend with the second palace master. After the second palace master was sent flying, he fell into the ruins covered in blood. He was both shocked and furious. He could not believe that Ji Tianxing's strength was so powerful. His injuries worsened and it caused his combat strength to drop even further. This was the first time in tens of thousands of years that he had been seriously injured. Not only had he lost his dignity, he would also need a long time to heal. Logically speaking, since the second palace master had been severely injured, Ji Tianxing should have seized the opportunity to pursue and attack. However, this was not part of his plan. From the beginning, his goal was to injure the second palace master by surprise, then find an opportunity to escape and shake off the second palace master's pursuit. Therefore, when the second palace master was sent flying, Ji Tianxing did not pursue him. Instead, he flew toward the Prajna God Emperor. The Prajna God Emperor was lying in the ruins covered in blood. He looked miserable and he was on the verge of death. Seeing Ji Tianxing fly over at lightning speed, she took out the Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and kept her in the Nirvana Flame Sea. She did not know why, but a strange look flashed in her eyes and she felt warmth in her heart. Although Ji Tianxing was expressionless and looked serious. However, she could feel that Ji Tianxing had been worried about her and cared about her safety. Thinking of this, the Prajna God Emperor's heart trembled. She quickly extinguished these thoughts and did not dare to think further. Zhoosh! With a flash of divine light, she was wrapped in a warm golden light and instantly returned to the Nirvana Flame Sea on the 9th floor of the pagoda. Next, even without Ji Tianxing's instructions, she would do her best to heal herself. Ji Tianxing put away the Jutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and decisively used the ultimate skill, so close, yet worlds apart, to teleport toward the east. Zhoosh! A dazzling white light flashed in the sky. Ji Tianxing's figure disappeared from the spot, and the next moment he appeared 150,000 miles away. The second palace master had just crawled out of the ruins and was circulating his energy to suppress his injuries. He was also casting a spell to summon the bronze mirror. He was still vigilant, guarding against Ji Tianxing taking the opportunity to launch a surprise attack. However, Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to escape, which greatly surprised him. He was stunned for a moment, then immediately reacted and wanted to chase after Ji Tianxing with the bronze mirror. However, his divine body's injuries were too severe, which severely reduced his combat ability. If he continued to use the teleportation technique to chase after Ji Tianxing, his divine body would definitely collapse. Moreover, even if he was not afraid of sacrificing his divine body and chased after Ji Tianxing regardless of the cost, he might not be able to catch up. Damn it! The second palace master stared in the direction that Ji Tianxing had gone and cursed unwillingly. His face was extremely ugly. Of course, the second palace master was wise enough not to chase after Ji Tianxing forcefully to avoid any mishaps. However, he had finally caught up with Ji Tianxing and locked onto Ji Tianxing's tracks. How could he give up so easily? After hesitating for a moment, the second palace master circulated his energy to suppress his injuries. He regained his composure and flew across the sky, continuing his pursuit toward the east. He was not trying to catch up with Ji Tianxing as soon as possible and bring him back to the Kongming Temple, but to lead the way for the other palace masters. Although he was seriously injured, the other 3 palace masters were on their way and were rushing over to support him as soon as possible. If he could delay long enough, when the other 3 palace masters arrived, it would be very easy for them to deal with Ji Tianxing together. Chapter 45:17. Swoosh. Ji Tianxing streaked across the sky as fast as lightning, flying towards the east. His flying speed was still the same as before. It did not decrease, but it did not increase either. However, the second palace master who was chasing after him had an obvious change. The second palace master was seriously injured. His body was covered in blood and he looked very miserable. His aura was also very weak. His flying speed was obviously slower than before and his strength was also much weaker. Logically speaking, he should have stopped to heal his wounds and suppress the injuries of his divine body as soon as possible. Otherwise, if his injuries continued to worsen, it would seriously damage his divine body and cause irreversible injuries, which would affect his future cultivation. Of course, the second palace master understood this. However, Ji Tianxing was too important to the Kongming Temple. He had to endure his injuries and continue to chase after Ji Tianxing. Even if he could not catch up with Ji Tianxing and capture Ji Tianxing, he had to follow Ji Tianxing. He could not lose track of Ji Tianxing. While chasing after Ji Tianxing, he did not forget to urge the other 3 palace masters to come as soon as possible. When the 3 palace masters arrived, they would intercept, kill and besiege Ji Tianxing. By then, the second palace master would be able to put down his heavy burden and mission and heal his wounds in peace. However, the second palace master still neglected a problem. He was seriously injured and his strength was greatly reduced. Not only was the number of times he could teleport reduced by more than half, but he could not use it frequently. Even the distance he could teleport across was reduced by half. He was not far from Ji Tianxing. The 2 of them were originally 100,000 miles apart. That was because Ji Tianxing had used the so close, yet worlds apart skill to instantly widen the distance. No matter how hard the second palace master tried, he could not catch up with Ji Tianxing in a short period of time. Moreover, after Ji Tianxing escaped more than 1 million miles away, he accumulated divine power and used the so close, yet worlds apart skill again. As a result, the distance between him and the second palace master was further widened to 200,000 miles. The second palace master became anxious at that time. He did not care about the worsening of his injuries. He sped up and chased after Ji Tianxing with all his might so that he would not be shaken off. However, the distance between him and Ji Tianxing was indeed closing little by little. However, his injuries were quickly worsening. He had used up too much of his divine power. His complexion became paler and paler and his aura became weaker and weaker. In the first 15 minutes he was still able to close the distance between him and Ji Tianxing. However, after an hour his injuries had worsened to a certain extent. After his strength had decreased further, his speed became even slower. On top of that, Ji Tianxing had used the so close, yet worlds apart twice. Each time he could instantly open up a distance of over 100,000 miles. Finally, the distance between the second palace master and Ji Tianxing had increased to 380,000 miles, leaving the range of the second palace master's divine sense. In other words, Ji Tianxing had finally gotten rid of the second palace master. Even though Ji Tianxing had changed the direction of his escape and did not leave behind any traces or clues, the second palace master was still unable to find him. He could only continue his pursuit. Another hour passed. The second palace master could not find any traces or aura of Ji Tianxing. He could only give up the pursuit in helplessness and anger. Due to the severe worsening of his injuries and the great depletion of his divine power, he returned dejectedly. During this period of time, a few palace masters, including the Grand Palace Master, sent him messages, asking about his location and the battle situation. The second palace master was filled with anger and embarrassment. He did not know how to answer them, so he ignored them for the time being. 4 hours later, the second palace master encountered many desolate race godly kings. The desolate race godly kings who had followed him to pursue Ji Tianxing had already stretched out their teams and were scattered. In the desolate and dangerous area, they were attacked by many beasts, resulting in a large number of casualties. When the second palace master met them, a group of desolate race godly kings were being besieged by a beast horde. They were still fighting a bloody battle, trying their best to break out of the encirclement. The second palace master was severely injured, so it was inconvenient for him to help in the battle. He released the aura of a god emperor and used the heavenly Tao to suppress the ferocious beasts. After a great deal of effort, the second palace master finally managed to scare the ferocious beasts away, helping the desolate race godly kings out of their predicament. Many of the desolate race godly kings who had yet to recover from their shock were severely injured. They were in a sorry state. They could not be bothered to treat their injuries. They hurriedly gathered around the second palace master and asked him about the outcome of the battle. The second palace master had chased Ji Tianxing for such a long distance and was severely injured. He must have fought with Ji Tianxing to the death. For Ji Tianxing to be able to injure the second palace master, it showed how powerful he was. But the final outcome was definitely the second palace master's victory. He had successfully captured Ji Tianxing. Faced with the desolate race godly king's expectant expressions and gazes, the second palace master's expression turned bitter. He remained silent. The godly kings caused a ruckus for a while before they gradually realized that something was amiss. Some of them observed the second palace master's expression and gradually guessed the outcome. They were extremely surprised and found it unbelievable. Could it be that the second palace master failed to capture the young god emperor and allowed him to escape? From the second palace master's reaction, it can't be that he failed to defeat the young god emperor and was even defeated by him, right? How can this be? How is this possible? Many of the desolate race godly kings could not accept this outcome. The second palace master did not wish to speak further. He waved his hand, indicating for everyone to treat their injuries. They quickly reorganized their teams and followed him back. When everyone saw his reaction, they were even more certain of their guesses. With complicated thoughts, they began to treat their injuries. Not long after, everyone finished treating their injuries. They reorganized their teams and rushed back with the second palace master. Not long after the group left, they encountered a group of desolate race godly kings. This group of desolate race godly kings were also covered in injuries. Many of them were in a wretched state. Clearly they had gone through a fierce battle. When they suddenly saw the second palace master and company flying towards them, this group of desolate race godly kings were overjoyed. They revealed expressions of relief. There were even a number of desolate race godly kings who could not help but exclaim. Previously they had been attacked by fierce beasts several times and had sacrificed many people. They had paid a heavy price to escape the encirclement. Now that they finally saw the second palace master and their companions, they felt that they were safe. Naturally they were overjoyed. On the other hand, the second palace master had been pursuing Ji Tianxing. No one could catch up to him. Although some people had suspected that the second palace master was acting, his injuries were real. This proved that the second palace master was indeed trying to capture someone. Since the second palace master had returned, he must have caught his target and was returning in triumph. As such, everyone did not need to rush back, nor did they need to risk their lives. How could they not be happy? However, after both parties met up, the desolate race godly kings realized that the second palace master was not in high spirits. He was heavily injured and his expression was gloomy. The desolate race godly monarchs that followed behind him also looked lifeless and listless. Needless to say, everyone was suspicious. They guessed that the mission had failed. Chapter 45:18. The second palace master was silent the entire way back. Along the way he met many desolate race godly kings. 6 hours later, everyone returned to the Kongming Temple's territory. There were more than 800 desolate race godly kings who returned with the second palace master. About 100 of them had lost their lives while pursuing Ji Tianxing. These people had either died from being besieged by fierce beasts, or they had accidentally entered a dangerous place and lost their lives in a trap. This matter made everyone feel ashamed. They had lost so many people before they even saw a trace of the young god emperor. It was too laughable. Not long after, the other 3 palace masters brought their own desolate race godly kings to meet up with the second palace master. Seeing the second palace master's injuries and mental state, the 3 palace masters did not need to ask to guess the outcome. While they felt deep regret, they also sympathized with the second palace master. After all, the young god emperor had escaped from the second palace master's hands. The second palace master had failed in his task, so he would be punished by the temple. The 4 palace masters gathered together. After everyone asked the second palace master about the details of the matter, they persuaded him to report the matter to the head palace master. The second palace master also knew that no matter how disappointed or angry the head palace master was, or how he would be punished, he would have to face this outcome sooner or later. After hesitating for a while and choosing his words carefully, the second palace master took out a transmission jade slip and sent a message to the head palace master. Not only did he explain the details of the matter in the transmission, he also emphasized the reason. After sending the transmission jade slip, he fell into silence. Together with the other 3 palace masters, he silently waited for the head palace master's reply. Everyone waited for an hour, but the head palace master did not send a transmission jade slip. However, the spiritual word bronze mirror that the 4 palace masters carried with them lit up at the same time. The spiritual word bronze mirror was a secret artifact that the head palace master had meticulously developed. It did not have any offensive or destructive power, and was mainly used for instant communication and communication. Those who wore the spiritual word bronze mirror could communicate with each other at any time, regardless of how far apart they were. It was more convenient than the transmission jade slip, and it was also more suitable for the palace masters to hold meetings and discuss matters. Seeing the spiritual word bronze mirror light up, the 4 palace masters hurriedly dismissed their attendants, allowing the guards to leave the chamber. Only the 4 of them remained in the chamber. They took out the spiritual word bronze mirror and placed it on the table in front of them. Schwa. Soon, all 4 spirit speech copper mirrors were activated, and 4 white light screens were formed. A scene appeared on the light screen. It was the scene of the first palace master sitting in the secret chamber. His face was somewhat gloomy and his eyes were very sharp and dignified. "Greetings, first palace master." The 4 hall masters bowed to the spiritual speech copper mirror and paid their respects to the grand hall master. The first palace master waved his hand, indicating for everyone to dispense with the formalities. His gaze then fell on the second palace master as he said in a deep voice, "Second palace master, we have meticulously prepared for so long, expending so much effort, manpower and material resources to finally intercept that young god emperor, but you let that guy escape from right under our noses. Although I believe that you have already done your best, and that young god emperor is indeed monstrous enough, with hundreds of wondrous skills. But I'm really disappointed in you. I'm utterly disappointed and heartbroken." The first palace master did not lose his temper. Even if he reprimanded the second palace master, he did not scold him. However, the palace masters understood his nature and knew that the great palace master was truly furious. He was truly too disappointed. The second palace master hurriedly bowed his head and admitted his mistake, asking the first palace master to punish him. Naturally, the first palace master would not punish him now. Instead, he would give him a chance to redeem himself. When they heard this, not only was the second palace master stunned, but the other 3 hall masters' faces also stiffened. They had a bad feeling in their hearts. "First palace master, do you mean that we should continue to pursue that young god emperor? But second palace master, we have already lost track of that guy. That guy has already escaped far away. Even if we go after him now, we won't be able to catch up with him." The 4 hall masters all felt that they should give up after failing the mission. However, the first palace master was obviously unwilling to give up and wanted everyone to continue the pursuit. "Second palace master, this is what I am most disappointed in. Even if you were seriously injured and were shaken off by that guy, you should continue to pursue him and not turn back." The first palace master stared sternly at the 4 hall masters and said in a low and serious tone, "That young god emperor is important to me. I don't need to reiterate, do I? Just like the Prajna god emperor, he is entering the Star of Origin for the first time. He is unfamiliar with everything here and does not understand the situation at all. He plunged into the unknown land and will definitely encounter danger and crisis. Also, don't forget that emperor-level ferocious beasts once appeared in the depths of the unknown land. They are ancient creatures. According to our speculation, it is very likely that there are groups and tribes of ferocious beasts hiding there. Even we do not dare to explore the unknown land. What good will come of him rashly entering the unknown land? When he encounters danger and crisis, you can wait for the opportunity to strike. Won't that be twice the result with half the effort?" After listening to the first palace master's words, The four hall masters fell silent and seriously analyzed and weighed the pros and cons. The fifth palace master hesitated for a moment before asking, "First palace master, the unknown land is too dangerous. Do the four of us have to go in? If we go into the unknown land to carry out a mission, bringing along those godly king realm guards and clansmen, they will definitely suffer heavy casualties." The third palace master and the fourth palace master hurriedly chimed in. They used the desolate race's godly kings as an excuse to persuade the first palace master to retract his order. However, the first palace master had already made up his mind. He said firmly, "This palace master has been established for more than 80,000 years. Have you forgotten the goal that we are pursuing? In the past 80,000 years, we have used all our strength and expended so much effort, but we have failed time and time again. Only that young God Emperor from the God realm meets our requirements the most. The eternal life that we have been pursuing all our lives is very likely to come true on him. Do you think that I will let him go? Not to mention entering the unknown land, even if he has to cross half of the Star of Origin, I will definitely capture him and bring him back." After pausing for a moment, the first palace master continued, "This time I will personally take action. You will be the vanguard. Once we capture that guy, we will return to the divine temple. As for the clansmen of the various hall masters and those godly king realm guards, what's the harm in sacrificing some? This palace master has nurtured them for tens of thousands of years, not to let them live in luxury. At the crucial moment, it is time for them to prove their loyalty and serve the divine temple." When the four hall masters heard that even the first palace master, who had never left the divine temple, was going to personally pursue the young god emperor, they did not dare to object. They knew that the first palace master was certain that the young god emperor was the person that the Kongming temple had been searching for tens of thousands of years. This time, no matter what price he had to pay, the first palace master would not give up. Chapter 45:19. After getting rid of the second palace master, Zhou Xian continued to fly east for another 5 million miles before slowing down. He had changed his direction twice before, so he was sure that the second palace master could not catch up. At least, the second palace master could not find him in the short term. But he would not forget that he was discovered by the Kongming temple when he fled east secretly, and they set up an ambush at the border in advance. He was sure that the Kongming temple must have some kind of divine item or divine skill that could pry into the secrets of heaven and find his location. So he did not dare to stop to heal himself and could only continue to fly forward. The area he was in was at least 80 million miles away from the eastern border of the Kongming temple. This was an uninhabited and unknown place. The surrounding scenery looked very primitive, and there was a dangerous aura amidst the gorgeous scenery. Every once in a while he would encounter some divine king-level beasts. Most of these beasts were creatures from the ancient times, and they were all strangely shaped. Many of them were strange beasts that he had never seen before. Although Zhou Xian was not afraid of the beasts' attacks, he did not want to be entangled with them and waste more energy. He took out the deity-slaying battleship and let the white dragon drive it to the east at a moderate speed. Before he went into seclusion to heal himself, he told the white dragon that he did not need to fly very fast. He only needed to hide his whereabouts and aura to ensure his safety. The white dragon had already made a mistake once. When he drove the deity-slaying battleship to the eastern border, he was discovered by the experts of the Kongming temple. Although his master did not reprimand or punish him, he felt very ashamed. Now that he was carrying out the same mission again, he naturally did not dare to be negligent. He secretly decided that he would not make another mistake. After handing the deity-slaying battleship to the white dragon, Zhou Xian returned to the distorted spacetime of the Jiutian Tenju Tower and went into seclusion to heal himself. Previously he had chased and fought with the second palace master for so long, and each time they clashed he would be lightly injured. In the end, the accumulation of many light injuries made his injuries worse, and his strength weakened by 30 to 40%. If he hadn't used the Prajna God Emperor as his trump card and caught the second palace master off guard, he probably wouldn't have been able to escape the second palace master's pursuit today. Fortunately, he managed to escape from the temple of Kongming's sphere of influence without mishap. Next, he only needed to safely pass through this uninhabited area. Perhaps in a few months he would be able to enter the territory of another temple. I wonder which temple's territory lies to the east of this uninhabited area. Hanya hasn't been able to draw the map yet, and this time she suffered such heavy injuries. I'm afraid she'll have to recuperate for a long time before she can give me an answer. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Ji Tianxing restrained his chaotic thoughts and began to take a divine pill to heal his injuries. The colorful distorted spacetime was as quiet as ever. Under the gigantic bloody flame sacred tree, Yunyao, Jiku, Wushuang, Wu Hen, Baifeng and the others were on various platforms. They were cultivating in peace and working hard to improve their strength. After Yunyao and Jiku reached the peak Divine King realm, they had been consolidating their strength. They wanted to break through to the God Emperor realm as soon as possible. Baifeng was already at the 9th level Divine King realm, and it was very likely that she would become the 3rd peak Divine King. As for Wushuang, Wu Hen, Chao Qingyu, Yank and the others, they followed Baifeng's cultivation speed and improved their strength quickly. In the past, when everyone was cultivating in seclusion, they would calculate the speed of resource consumption and didn't dare to be too extravagant. However, after entering the Star of Origin, everyone understood the situation of the planet and completely dispelled their worries. After all, there were endless cultivation resources on the Star of Origin, and they were all extremely high-quality treasures of heaven and earth. Thus, they no longer had any scruples when cultivating. No matter how many cultivation resources they used, they only wanted to improve their strength as quickly as possible. Not only Ji Tianxing's friends and family, but also his hundreds of thousands of followers and 50,000 soldiers were also desperately trying to strengthen themselves. Everyone knew that they would soon be put to good use and could do great things. Unknowingly, a month passed. During this month, the White Dragon always remembered Ji Tianxing's instructions. He didn't pursue speed, only stability and concealment. Although the god-slaying battleship did encounter many ferocious beasts along the way. However, the god-slaying battleship hid its tracks and aura. Those God-King ferocious beasts also found it difficult to detect anything unusual. Only a God-Emperor realm powerhouse could see through the god-slaying battleship's disguise. The White Dragon was especially careful and avoided many ferocious beasts and dangerous areas. At this time, Ji Tianxing had been recuperating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for 4 years. His injuries had finally recovered. After ending his seclusion, he first contacted the White Dragon to ask about the situation. After learning that everything was normal and that the god-slaying battleship had not been exposed or attacked, he was relieved. Then he entered the Sea of Nirvana Flames on the 9th level of the Divine Pagoda to visit the heavily injured Prajna God Emperor. When he entered the Sea of Nirvana Flames, the Prajna God Emperor was still recuperating in a 5-colored light barrier and didn't react to his arrival. That 5-colored light barrier with a radius of 10,000 feet used to be a sealing array. Now it had become a protective barrier to help her cultivate. Previously, she had been heavily injured by the second palace master and was in an especially wretched state. After such a long period of recuperation, her external injuries had mostly recovered, but her internal injuries were still severe. Ji Tianxing could see that she was at a critical juncture of recuperation, so he didn't disturb her. He turned to look at God King Crimson Dawn. God King Crimson Dawn's godhead was still sealed in the array, suspended in a 5-colored light barrier. Ji Tianxing had promised the Prajna God Emperor that as long as she agreed to cooperate, he would let God King Crimson Dawn go. Thus, with a wave of his hand, he activated the sealing array and removed the seal on God King Crimson Dawn. Then he changed the array, turning it into a protective barrier to protect God King Crimson Dawn's godhead. However, there were cracks in God King Crimson Dawn's godhead and she was still unconscious. Ji Tianxing could only personally activate the array, channeling vast amounts of divine power to help God King Crimson Dawn repair the damage to her godhead. After 10 whole days, the cracks in God King Crimson Dawn's godhead finally healed. Although her injuries were still severe, she gradually regained consciousness under Ji Tianxing's treatment. After waking up, she was dazed for a moment. Suddenly she sensed Ji Tianxing's aura and was shocked, subconsciously running away. Damn it! Why are you here? God King Crimson Dawn's godhead retreated to the edge of the array and had nowhere to go. She looked at Ji Tianxing warily, her voice panicked and anxious. She had originally thought that the person who had saved her would be her master. She didn't expect it to be her master and disciple's enemy, Kenshin Ruanshan. Ji Tianxing looked at her indifferently and said calmly, "Your master has long since formed an alliance with me and reached an agreement to cooperate. Don't panic, I won't kill you. Otherwise you would have ceased to exist. Focus on recuperating from your injuries and quickly reconstruct your divine body. Chapter 45-20. Xianxia deity king was filled with hatred and fear towards Zhi Tianxing. But when she heard his words, she unexpectedly felt relieved and her emotions stabilized. She looked at the pan-god emperor who was recuperating in the five-colored light barrier and said to Zhi Tianxing, "You said you won't kill me, I can believe that. But you said my teacher has formed an alliance with you. I don't believe it." Xianxia deity king thought, with her teacher's arrogance, even if she lost to Long Tian, she would never submit to him. Zhi Tianxing said indifferently, "It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. Quickly recuperate and reconstruct your divine body so you can serve me, this is the important thing." With that he ignored Xianxia deity king and turned to leave. Xianxia deity king was stunned for a moment, then shouted with shame and anger, "You despicable bastard, don't even think about ordering me around, I will never submit to you." Zhi Tianxing completely ignored her. He stepped across the sea of fire and entered the five-colored light barrier where Great Wisdom Divine Emperor was. At this time the pan-god emperor's recuperation had passed the critical point and she could talk. She opened her eyes and glanced at Zhi Tianxing, then asked with a slightly unhappy tone, "What did you say to Xianxia?" Zhi Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said, "Don't worry, I didn't say anything bad about you." The pan-god emperor was a little angry and wanted to refute, but she thought about it and held back. She closed her eyes and said in a low voice, "I have fulfilled my promise. You should also fulfill your promise and let Xianxia go and help her reconstruct her divine body." Zhi Tianxing frowned and showed an unwilling expression. "I promised you that I would let her go, but I didn't say I would help her reconstruct her divine body. You also know that it is very difficult for a peak deity king like her to reconstruct her divine body. I don't have that much time." The Prajna god emperor opened his eyes angrily and glared at him. "You promised me, how can you go back on your word? You know that her wounds are too severe. With her own power it's hard to rebuild her body. How can you just stand and watch?" Zhi Tianxing sneered and said, "She's not my disciple. Why should I waste my time and energy to help her reconstruct her divine body? If I have that time I can cultivate in seclusion a few more times and condense the third Taoist rhyme as soon as possible." "You." The Prajna god emperor was exasperated and said with an ugly expression, "If you go back on your word, don't blame me for breaking the agreement." Zhi Tianxing bent down and stared into her eyes. He chuckled and said, "You reminded me of something. When we were talking about the alliance and the agreement, how could I forget to plant a restriction on you to threaten and control you? In this way you'll be obedient and won't be able to bargain with me." The Prajna god emperor stubbornly raised his head and sneered, "Hee. You regret it, right? Then make up for it now. Anyway, I'm already heavily injured and can't resist. Isn't that what you want?" Seeing how stubborn she was and how she refused to admit defeat, Zhi Tianxing felt rather bored. He shook his head and said, "In view of your previous performance, I've decided to postpone it for a while. When you don't know your place, I'll naturally make a move against you." The Prajna god emperor turned his head away, unwilling to look at his expression. He snorted with anger still lingering in his voice, "Shameless." Zhi Tianxing pretended not to hear and said expressionlessly, "I didn't come here today to chat with you. The map I asked you to draw and the ancient records, have you finished them?" The Prajna god emperor threw a jade slip in front of him with a cold face. "I've already given it to you. You can leave now. Don't be an eyesore here." Zhi Tianxing picked up the jade slip and used his divine sense to read the contents of the jade slip. As he read, he muttered to himself, "You've already finished it. Let me see if it's real or fake and if there are any omissions." The Prajna god emperor was so angry that his eyebrows jumped. He said fiercely, "I don't have a photographic memory like you. My memory is very bad. Those two maps and ancient records have too many omissions. Let's see if you have the ability to correct them and complete them." Zhi Tianxing knew that he was speaking out of anger, but he didn't refute. He nodded and said, "And thank you for the reminder. Then I'll take a closer look." The Prajna god emperor was so angry that he was speechless. He shouted coldly, "You can leave now. I don't want to see you." Zhi Tianxing took the jade slip and left without looking back. The Prajna god emperor was so angry that he gritted his teeth. After he left the Nirvana flame sea for a long time, his mood gradually calmed down. At this time in the five-colored light barrier 10,000 zhang away, Xianxia God King transmitted his voice to her and asked weakly, "Master, what's going on? Are you really working with him?" Clearly, Xianxia God King had heard the argument between the Prajna God Emperor and Ji Tianxing clearly. The Prajna God Emperor glanced at her and said calmly, "Master can't beat him. Naturally, I'll prioritize my own life. You don't need to get to the bottom of it. Focus on healing your injuries is the most important thing." "Oh." Xianxia God King replied. She was still a little worried and asked, "Master, are you working with him to avenge him and deal with the other four God Emperors?" The Prajna God Emperor didn't answer her and didn't have any intention to speak. He continued to heal his injuries. Xianxia God King muttered in her heart. She felt that her master's temperament had changed. As for the question she had just asked from the Prajna God Emperor's reaction, she had a rough idea of the answer. Although the answer left her shocked and in disbelief, she could feel her master's fatigue and helplessness. Perhaps, the reason why her master made such a choice and decided to compromise was because she had no choice but to do so? Thinking of the word, difficulties, Xianxia God King's body suddenly trembled as a thought appeared in her mind. Master's difficulties can't be because of me, can they? Back then, in order to protect me, Master fought with Kenshin for so long and suffered heavy injuries. Later, my divine body was destroyed by Kenshin and I lost my consciousness. With Kenshin's strength, he could definitely kill me or seize the opportunity to capture me. With Master's strength and methods, even if she was heavily injured, she could break through the encirclement and escape. As long as she wanted to escape, Kenshin wouldn't be able to stop her. But in the end, both Master and I were sealed here, and Master was forced to compromise with Kenshin. Kenshin must have used my life as a hostage to force Master to work for him. That must be it. Damn it, how could he be so despicable? Xianxia God King had always been smart, but her personality was a little naive. She pondered and analyzed for a moment. Thinking that she had guessed the truth, she felt a deep sense of guilt and anger. Because she was a burden to her master, she felt guilty and uneasy. And because of Kenshin's treachery, her master's plan failed and the entire Prajna fleet was destroyed. This made her furious and she hated Kenshin even more. Chapter 45-21. After Ji Tianxing returned to the distorted spacetime, he had been reading the jade scroll that Pan Ri God Emperor had given him. There were indeed 2 maps and 5 ancient manuals inside. One of the maps was a map of the Kongming Temple's sphere of influence. In it, the Kongming Temple's sphere of influence was marked in detail. There were dozens of branches in the territory as well as many famous locations, mystic realms, forbidden lands, etc. Ji Tianxing only took a cursory glance and memorized it before he stopped studying it. After all, he had already left the Kongming Temple's sphere of influence. It was possible that he would not return here for many years. The reason why he memorized the map was to be prepared. If he needed it in the future, he would at least have an impression of it. He focused on studying the second map. It was a map of the Star of Origin that the Kongming Temple had painstakingly drawn 30,000 years ago, after expending a great deal of manpower and effort. The Star of Origin was circular, but the map was flat. However, the map was extremely vast. On it, the 4 great temples' sphere of influence were marked in detail, as well as their positions and approximate distances. The territories of each temple were not far apart. They had dozens to hundreds of branches, which included countless desolate race citizens. However, after careful observation, Ji Tianxing realized that the territories of the 4 great temples did not even add up to 30% of the Star of Origin. Most of the remaining areas were unoccupied and were marked as unknown lands. Although the 4 great temples were not connected, they were at the same height. To the north of the 4 great temples was a boundless mysterious ocean. It was unknown how big it was. The southernmost part was also a boundless ocean. Only a few God Emperor realm experts had been there. Hence, the best way to go from one temple to another was to go east and west, passing through the unknown lands. No matter how dangerous the unknown lands were, they were accompanied by opportunities. Furthermore, the distance was slightly closer. If one went north and south, passing through the mysterious ocean at the 2 poles would result in death. This was because the map clearly indicated that the mysterious ocean at the 2 poles was the most dangerous place on the Star of Origin. Ji Tianxing carefully observed the map and studied it for a long time. Finally, he memorized the entire map in his mind. As for whether or not the map was missing something, he wasn't worried. Although he mocked the Prajna God Emperor, he believed that with the Prajna God Emperor's intelligence and wisdom, he definitely had a photographic memory. How could the Prajna God Emperor forget something as important as the map of the Star of Origin? After memorizing the map, Ji Tianxing muttered in his heart, wondering what secrets were hidden in the mysterious sea of the North and South Poles. Although the map made by the Kongming Temple did not state the reason. However, he still felt that something was amiss. Could it be that the Kongming Temple had deliberately exaggerated the dangers of the two seas? Or could it be that the two mysterious seas were hiding some sort of secret? Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing knew too little about the Star of Origin and had never been to those two seas. He made wild guesses and deductions without any basis, so he couldn't deduce anything. So he could only dispel these thoughts and continue reading the few ancient books and records in the Jade Slip. According to the Prajna God Emperor, these ancient books and records were found in her study. There were thousands of books in the study, most of which were books about legends and stories. There was neither a systematic introduction to the Star of Origin nor many clues and values. Only these few books were carefully selected by her, and she felt that they still had some value and significance. Ji Tianxing carefully read these ancient books and learned many clues about the Kongming Temple and the Star of Origin. Although these books were mainly about travel experiences and half of them were based on hearsay, they were still very different from the rest of the books. However, after Ji Tianxing finished reading these ancient books, he summarized, screened and filtered them, and summed up a lot of useful information. At the very least, he had a deeper understanding of the Kongming Temple. This included the general realm, temperament and style of the several temple masters, as well as the power and background of the dozens of branches and so on. Even the basic situation of the other three temples was covered in these ancient books, but it was not so detailed. Ji Tianxing sorted out this information and began to calculate the next itinerary and plan. Now I am in the unknown land east of the Kongming Temple. If I continue to go east for about 2 billion miles, I will cross the unknown land and enter the sphere of influence of the Xianxia Temple. I heard Prajna say before that the Shura God Emperor fell in the northwest of the Xianxia Temple, and has been in contact with the Xianxia Temple. In this case, I will go to the Xianxia Temple, find the Shura God Emperor first and kill him. Finding the other 4 God Emperors to take revenge was Ji Tianxing's top priority. The best choice was to kill them one by one. He could not let the 4 God Emperors gather and join forces to deal with him. Prajna shouldn't have lied to me. The strength of the Shura God Emperor is 1 realm higher than her. Since she has condensed 3 Taoist rhymes, the Shura God Emperor should have condensed 4 Taoist rhymes, which is similar to the 4th Temple Master. With this thought, Ji Tianxing was confident that it would not be difficult to deal with the Shura God Emperor. But this was a matter for the future. What he needed to consider now was the unknown land around him. According to the records of the Kongming Temple, it seemed to be very dangerous. 70,000 years ago, the Kongming Temple was only established for about 10,000 years, and its sphere of influence was not as big as it is now. At that time, the 1st Temple Master and the 3rd Temple Master led a group of God King realm experts into this unknown land. They explored it for 2 years before leaving. According to the records of the ancient books, this unknown land was still in a barbaric and primitive state, with countless ferocious beasts and divine beasts living there. Those ferocious beasts and divine beasts were not developed, but they were blessed by the heavens and basically had the strength of a God Lord realm or God King realm. When the 2 Temple Masters and many desolate race God Kings explored this unknown land in search of treasures, they encountered countless dangers and crises. In the end, the number of desolate race God Kings that managed to leave this unknown land alive was less than 30% of the initial number. In the depths of the unknown land, the 1st Temple Master even sensed the aura of Emperor-level experts. Around the 2 Emperor-level experts, there were a large number of God King realm ferocious beasts and divine beasts. It was obvious that those 2 auras were God Emperor realm divine beasts. From then on, the Kongming Temple listed this unknown land as a forbidden area, and did not allow its people to approach it. Even the Temple Masters would not easily step foot in it. Ji Tianxing secretly pondered, thinking that it would be best if he did not encounter those ferocious beasts, especially those God Emperor realm beasts. Those ferocious beasts and divine beasts were uneducated and unreasonable. Even if they did not have any enmity with him, once they encountered him, they might turn ferocious and fight him to the death. If it really reached that stage, he would suffer great loss. Regardless of whether he could defeat them, he had to stall for time and endure the danger. Chapter 45-22. After dealing with the map and ancient books, Ji Tianxing began to meditate and cultivate, continuing to improve his strength. Although he had only condensed the second Tao rhyme and it would be difficult for him to improve in the near future, he should consolidate his strength. However, when he was traveling on the Star of Origin, he had to cross thousands of mountains and rivers every day to appreciate the primitive scenery of the Star of Origin and feel the mysterious and boundless aura of heaven and earth. This had a great cleansing effect on his Tao heart, and also allowed him to comprehend more laws between heaven and earth and gain more insights. In the past, he would always kill one divine king after another, devour their divine persona fragments, and refine their divine Tao laws. However, now he had mastered more than 2,200 laws, and was not far from the complete realm of 3,000 great Taos. Wanting to obtain even more laws of the divine Tao by killing those god kings had already become too unrealistic. Only by relying on his own comprehension and condensation could he condense divine Tao laws one after another at a faster pace. To put it simply, Ji Tianxing, who had just condensed the second Tao rhyme, was already pondering on condensing the third Tao rhyme. In addition, there was another matter that had always been lingering in his mind, and now it was time to resolve it. Before entering the Star of Origin, when he had roamed the divine world and the extraterritorial starry sky, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was naturally powerful and unparalleled. However, after entering the Star of Origin, he had consecutively fought with several God Emperor experts. Not to mention the God Emperor Pan Ruol, she only had a quasi-emperor level divine weapon, which was considered a semi-finished product of the emperor-level divine weapon. However, the 4th Temple Master and 2nd Temple Master of the Kongming Temple both had genuine emperor-level divine weapons. As for the other Temple Masters or the God Emperor experts that Ji Tianxing might encounter in the future, most of them had emperor-level divine weapons. For the God Emperor of the Star of Origin, emperor-level divine weapons were the standard. Ji Tianxing also had the Sword of Burial of Heaven, which was a top-grade king-level divine weapon. Of course, he could not defeat those God Emperor experts. He had long been planning to find a way to upgrade the quality of the Sword of Burial of Heaven and make it an Emperor-grade divine artifact. If the Sword of Burial of Heaven could become an Emperor-level artifact, he would have a better chance of winning against those God Emperors in the future. Although the planet of origin is rich in cultivation resources, with heavenly materials and earthly treasures everywhere, it is the ultimate holy land for cultivators. However, the materials that could turn the Burial of Heaven into an Emperor-level artifact were far too rare and difficult to find. When I arrive at the Shangqing Temple's territory and search for monarch-level materials there, it will definitely attract the attention of the Shangqing Temple. If it isn't there, I can only search for materials in this unknown place, but I will also disturb the God Emperor-level divine beast. Ji Tianxing was certain that the planet of origin had the best materials for refining weapons, which could turn the Burial of Heaven into an Emperor-level divine weapon. But where to find it became a problem that gave him a headache. Moreover, he had never forged an Emperor-level divine artifact before, so he wasn't sure what materials he would need. He would only know if they were usable after encountering those Emperor-level materials. In short, this was also a big problem. Unknowingly, another month had passed. Bai Long steered the god-slaying battleship and carefully flew over thousands of mountains and rivers, entering the center of the unknown place. Although he had seen countless dangers along the way, he had also encountered countless strange ferocious beasts. But he was cautious enough to avoid most of the dangers with his own wisdom. Occasionally he would be surrounded by a group of beasts, but he could quickly escape without suffering any injuries. Previously, Ji Tianxing had shown him the map of the planet of origin, so he knew in his heart that this was the core area of the unknown place, and it was the most dangerous and unpredictable. Therefore, after entering the central area of the unknown place, Bai Long became even more cautious. But even so, he was still full of apprehension and felt uneasy in his heart as if something was wrong. He knew that his master was cultivating in seclusion, and before confirming the dangers and crises, he didn't dare to casually disturb his master. He could only further reduce the speed of the god-slaying battleship and do his best to hide his whereabouts and aura. At this time, Ji Tianqing was still cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. A month had passed in the outside world and he had cultivated for another 4 years, condensing 10 divine Tao laws, and his strength had increased slightly. However, he also suddenly had a sudden impulse, vaguely feeling that something was wrong, and an uneasy premonition arose in the bottom of his heart. It was as if some huge crisis was descending invisibly, enveloping him and unable to be dispelled. Many years ago, when Ji Tianqing was still in the God world in the outer realm, he had a few similar experiences. And every time he had a sudden impulse, it was a reminder and prediction from the heavenly Tao, and it came true every time. Therefore, Ji Tianqing didn't dare to neglect and immediately became alert. Chapter 45-23. The 5-colored clouds sealed the space within a radius of 100,000 miles. A formless divine might of heaven and earth and the intense pressure of a god-emperor instantly enveloped the god-slaying battleship. The power of heaven and earth was like 2 giant palms that clenched and squeezed the god-slaying battleship, causing its movements to become sluggish. Even White Dragon could clearly sense that this was definitely the attack of a god-emperor. He did not panic in the face of danger. He hurriedly controlled the god-slaying battleship to stop in the sky and focus on forming a shield to prevent the battleship from being attacked. Master, what should we do? While controlling the god-slaying battleship, White Dragon did not forget to ask Ji Tianqing what plan he had in mind so that he could cooperate. But Ji Tianqing waved his hand, indicating for him to calm down and not worry too much. Because he had sensed that the one who had cast the 5-colored fog was indeed a god-emperor level beast. But the other party only had a strong sense of enmity and no obvious killing intent. It was as if he had intruded into the other party's territory and angered the other party, so the other party would definitely teach him a painful lesson. But the 2 parties did not know each other and there was no deep hatred between them, so the other party might not kill him. Seeing Ji Tianqing's confidence and calmness, White Dragon's worry was greatly reduced. Since his master was not moving, he would not act rashly either. He only controlled the god-slaying battleship and focused on forming a shield. A moment later, the 5-colored clouds that blotted out the sky formed a massive fortress that merged with the heavens and earth for 1,000,000 miles. It was impregnable. At this moment, in the sky in front of the battleship, a giant golden beast that was 10,000 feet tall walked out of the clouds. It was different from the various divine beasts that Ji Tianqing had seen before. Most of them were covered in feathers or scales. This giant beast's appearance was very similar to a long-armed ape. Its entire body was covered in golden fur mixed with black and purple stripes. Its body was covered in a layer of hazy light. It stood on 2 feet like a human, but it had 4 arms that hung naturally below its knees. Its thick and long tail coiled around its waist like a belt. His broad face had the same subtle expression as a human's, with a hint of majesty and sternness. It stood in the sky with its wide legs and colorful clouds above its head. It looked down at the god-slaying battleship with cold hostility in its brown eyes. Ji Tianqing was certain that the giant beast in front of him was not a gibbon, nor was it an ape he had seen before. Although it didn't look as mighty as those ape-type divine beasts and exotic beasts, and even looked a little like it had returned to its original state, it didn't look as majestic as those ape-type divine beasts. However, it was a genuine god-emperor. It had long fused with the power of the heavenly Tao and condensed its Taoist rhymes. Furthermore, it was not at the initial level of the god-emperor. It had condensed at least 4 Taoist rhymes and was an expert in the middle level of god-emperor. White Dragon looked up at the golden-haired ape and asked Ji Tianqing quietly, "Master, we've seen all kinds of ape-type demon beasts and divine beasts before. There are at least 800 of them, if not 1,000. All of them look mighty or ferocious and domineering. Why does this god-emperor golden-haired ape look a little ordinary? It's not domineering and ferocious?" Ji Tianqing asked calmly, "Have you ever thought about why this place is called the Star of Origin? This golden-haired ape in front of us, has it lived for more than 100,000 years?" White Dragon was stunned for a moment, then came to a realization and nodded. "Master, you're right. This is the Star of Origin. It's the origin of the universe and the peak of all things in the world. It was possible that all the apes in the universe had originated from this place. This golden-haired ape might be the ancestor of all the apes in the world. Of course, These were all White Dragon's conjectures and could not be confirmed. Tianxing did not intend to explain further. Seeing that the golden-haired ape only stopped the god-slaying battleship and did not attack immediately, he instructed White Dragon, "Stay in the battleship. I'll put it away and meet it personally to see what it wants." "Master, be careful." Hearing that his master wanted to face the golden-haired ape alone, White Dragon was somewhat worried. He hurriedly shouted, "We have nothing to do with it. You don't have to waste time with it. If things don't go well, you should leave this place and escape from its entanglement." As a disciple, he obviously could not use the words "run if you can't beat it" to persuade his master. Tianxing nodded, and with a flash he left the battleship and appeared in the sky. Immediately following that, the god-slaying battleship rapidly shrank into a point of light and entered his body. In the cloud fortress that spanned 100,000 miles, only Tianxing and the golden-haired ape were left. They faced each other in the sky. Although the difference in size between the two was huge. Compared to the 10,000 feet tall golden-haired ape, Tianxing appeared extremely tiny. However, the golden-haired ape's pupils constricted as it stared at Tianxing. It first flashed a look of surprise before it turned serious. Clearly, the golden-haired ape had noticed something from Tianxing. It originally believed that the owner of the battleship that had silently intruded into its territory was a powerful desolate race god emperor. Although it was not much stronger than it, it was at least not weaker than it. However, it never expected that the owner of the divine battleship was not a member of the desolate race, but a foreign race that it had never seen before. More importantly, the foreign race god emperor in front of it seemed to have condensed 2 Dao charms, but he had an aura that was in no way weaker than it. Although the golden-haired ape was a divine beast and had not been educated, it did not mean that it did not have intelligence. It could also see some clues and sense that Tianxing wasn't simple. Just as the golden-haired ape was sizing up Tianxing took the initiative to speak. "Your Excellency, what are your intentions for setting up an ambush here?" He spoke in the desolate race's language. The reason why he asked was because he felt that the golden-haired ape would definitely be able to understand and communicate with him normally. Just as expected. The golden-haired ape frowned and said in a dull voice, "Little rascal, this is my territory. How dare you trespass? Are you courting death?" Its tone was very dignified and fierce, but its voice sounded awkward and unfamiliar. Clearly, it could speak the desolate race's language, but it did not usually speak it, resulting in its awkward pronunciation. Tianxing cupped his hands at it and said with an indifferent expression, "This emperor is just passing by and has no intention of offending you. Your Excellency, please let me pass. This emperor will leave as soon as possible and will not stay any longer." Although the golden-haired ape's tone was unfriendly, he did not take it to heart. He did not want to create unnecessary trouble and waste time. However, the golden-haired ape did not have any intention of letting things go. It grinned and revealed a sneer. "Kid, you are an outsider, right? Her. You probably have not heard of my name, Skyrending. You dare to leave unscathed after trespassing into my territory? Today, if you do not leave something behind, don't even think of leaving." Tianxing frowned as a cold beam flashed in his eyes. He thought to himself, "This golden-haired ape wants to rob me? From the looks of it, it should be at the middle stage of the God Emperor, having condensed 4 to 5 Dao charms. If I were to fight it, it should not be difficult for me to escape unscathed." Chapter 45-24. Tianxing had already made up his mind. However, before the golden-haired ape made his move, he was still willing to communicate with him. Perhaps he could get more useful information. For example, what secrets did this unknown land have? "Oh. Then tell me, what do you want to rob?" Tianxing raised his eyebrows and sneered as he looked at the golden-haired ape. The golden-haired ape stared at him for a while before saying, "Where's your ship? Hand it over. You don't even think about leaving. Come back with me first. I'll only let you go after 100 years. Tianxing's eyes flashed with astonishment and confusion. He thought the golden-haired ape would rob him of some cultivation resources or treasures. At the very least, it would be some kind of secret manual. He didn't expect the golden-haired ape to rob him of his god-slaying battleship and lock him up for 100 years. Forgive me for speaking bluntly, but that battleship is only a top-grade king-level item. It's not even an emperor-level artifact. What do you want it for?" Ji Tianxing looked at the golden-haired ape and asked the question in his heart. The golden-haired ape obviously wouldn't tell him the answer. He shouted fiercely, "Why do you care what I want? I'll take it for fun." "Can't I take it for fun?" Ji Tianxing felt that this golden-haired ape didn't seem like a mid-level god emperor. He didn't have that kind of dignity and shrewdness. Maybe it's because he hasn't been educated, so he doesn't have any schemes or shrewdness? He guessed. Seeing that the golden-haired ape was serious and didn't seem to be joking, he asked again, "Then why do you want me to stay for 100 years? The golden-haired ape stared at him and said fiercely, "Of course it's to make you work for me. Do you think I'll treat you like a guest?" Ji Tianxing spread his hands and said indifferently, "If you sincerely invite me to be your guest, maybe I'll go with you. Maybe I'll even let you tour the battleship. But with your attitude, there's no need to talk about it." The golden-haired ape grinned and his face became much more ferocious. He laughed coldly and said, "Hee hee. Little guy, you've fallen into my boundless auspicious cloud formation. It's not up to you whether you come or go." Ji Tianxing looked around at the 5 colored clouds that covered the sky and covered the sun like a fortress. He curled his lips and asked, "You call this thing a grand formation?" At first, this emperor thought that you had some secret techniques and insights that allowed you to set up a special formation. "I didn't expect that you would use the divine power of heaven and earth and the power of the heavenly Tao that you cultivate to casually roll it into a ball and throw it out." Indeed, the golden-haired ape's control over the divine power of heaven and earth was more skillful than Ji Tianxing's, and the power of heaven and earth he cultivated was more profound. However, it didn't seem to have found the best way to set up the formation. It could only desperately pile up the divine power of heaven and earth and the power of the heavenly Tao, and finally create such a huge 5-colored fortress. For example, when Ji Tianxing set up the formation, it was like a top craftsman. He only used a small amount of wood, bricks and tiles to build a beautiful house. However, the golden-haired ape chopped down a large forest, dug up half a mountain and gathered countless wood, soil and stones and finally piled up a stone cave. Although both could be lived in and could be used to shelter people from the wind and rain. However, the difference in appearance was too big and the practicality was also very different. The golden-haired ape obviously knew its weaknesses and shortcomings. After being mercilessly attacked by Ji Tianxing, it was instantly embarrassed and angry. "Bastard! How dare you look down on my boundless auspicious cloud? I'll let you see its power now." Probably because it was a little guilty, it didn't say anything about the formation and was about to attack angrily. However, before it could control the formation to attack Ji Tianxing had already made the first move. He used a secret technique to form a giant sword that was thousands of feet long, and pierced it towards a certain cloud in the northwest direction. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, the sword that was thousands of feet long instantly pierced through the thick condensed 5-colored cloud, and pierced a big hole in the fortress. The golden-haired ape thought that the formation that was meticulously developed and powerful was actually so weak in front of Ji Tianxing. It was stunned and looked at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. It even forgot to control the formation. On the other hand, after Ji Tianxing's sword pierced through the boundless auspicious cloud formation, he looked at the golden-haired ape and smiled. "This is your so-called formation?" The golden-haired ape's face was full of awkwardness and shame. Originally, it was prepared to attack, but after seeing how powerful Ji Tianxing's formation skills were, it could only dismiss the idea of controlling the formation. After all, even if it controlled the formation to attack Ji Tianxing would be able to easily break it. At that time, its formation would be broken into pieces. That would be too embarrassing and embarrassing. The golden-haired ape cast a spell to withdraw the formation and used its powerful aura to suppress Ji Tianxing. It said in a fierce tone, "Brat, even if I don't use the formation, I can still kill you easily." As it said that, it raised its 4 strong arms and drew on the divine power of heaven and earth, condensing it into an earth-shattering divine skill that charged towards Ji Tianxing. Swoosh! The vast and mighty divine power of heaven and earth formed several light pillars that were tens of thousands of feet long. With the power to destroy everything, they fell from the sky and smashed towards Ji Tianxing. The sky around Ji Tianxing was squeezed out by the light pillars and cracks appeared in the void. The mountains and earth beneath his feet were also cracked and turned into ruins. Danger descended, but Ji Tianxing was not afraid and did not move an inch. He raised his palms and drew on his mighty divine power, supplemented by hundreds of divine Dao laws and heavenly Dao divine power, and struck out 2 giant palms that blotted out the sky. Boom. Crack. In the next moment, the 2 giant golden palms collided with the 6 5-colored light pillars, creating a deafening explosion that reverberated between heaven and earth. The violent shockwave carried thousands of fragments of divine light and spread out in all directions, sweeping through hundreds of thousands of miles of mountains and valleys. Suddenly, all the mountains in this area were flattened and the vast forest was instantly reduced to ashes. Such an earth-shattering commotion could be heard from hundreds of thousands of miles away, and they could also sense the terrifying divine power fluctuations. Thus, those ferocious beasts and divine beasts that were hiding nearby and observing in the dark all fled into the distance in panic. At the center of the explosion, Tianxia and the golden-haired ape were safe and sound. They were still tens of thousands of feet apart, facing each other in the sky. Tianxia looked askance at the golden-haired ape, a hint of a smile on his lips. He asked, "This is your true strength? If that's the case, then you must be dreaming if you want to keep me here." The golden-haired ape's face twisted in anger and embarrassment. It bared its teeth and glared at Tianxia, but it did not know how to refute. It had no choice. It was a mid-level god emperor and had only condensed 5 Taoist rhymes. Although its strength was far higher than Tianxia's, the two of them were evenly matched in terms of combat strength. Tianxia continued, "You and I don't know each other, nor do we have any enmity. Since you can't do anything to me, then let's part ways here. There's no need to waste any more time." With that, Tianxia turned to leave. However, the golden-haired ape roared and blocked his path again. "Don't even think about leaving." Chapter 45-25. The golden-haired ape roared and teleported hundreds of miles in a flash, blocking Tianxia's path. Tianxia frowned. His expression was cold as he asked in a low voice, "You don't want to admit defeat? Do you want to fight to the death before you stop?" The golden-haired ape grinned and sneered in disdain. "You want to fight to the death with me? You have to have the right to do so. If I didn't have other methods and preparations, why would I attack so easily? How would I have the confidence to keep you here?" Tianxia raised his eyebrows. He sensed that the situation was not good. The golden-haired ape knew that it could not defeat him, but it was still so confident. There must be something else. As expected, Tianxia quickly detected that in the sky behind him, there was a hidden aura approaching at an extremely fast speed. That aura was very strong. It must be a god-emperor realm powerhouse, and it was not weaker than the golden-haired ape. "I see." Tianxia instantly understood. It must be the golden-haired ape's helper. Swoosh. In the blink of an eye, that aura came close and stopped 100,000 feet away from Tianxia. It removed its disguise and revealed its gigantic body in the sky. This was also a giant beast from the ancient era. Its body was 100,000 feet long, and its appearance was ferocious and ferocious. Its appearance was like a divine dragon, but its entire body was purplish-black. It was covered in thick scales and its back was full of spikes. It did not have 4 or 5 claws like a divine dragon. Instead, it was like a centipede with 2 rows of 18 sharp claws and a pair of black bone wings. Its slender tail was very sharp and had barbs like a scorpion. Its huge head was a little flat and wide like a python's head. There was a huge red tumor on its forehead and a pair of horns on its head. It stood in the sky and looked down at Tianxia. Its pair of huge green eyes revealed a chilling light and intent. Tianxia turned around and stared at the ugly dragon-shaped vicious beast, sizing it up. Just as he had guessed, this ferocious beast was at the middle level of God Emperor, and it had at least 5 Taoist rhymes. Its strength was slightly stronger than the golden-haired ape. Moreover, there was a difference in temperament between the two. The golden-haired ape's power attribute leaned towards holy, light, and majestic aura. It was a divine beast. The temperament of this dragon-shaped beast was sinister, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. It did not seem like a divine dragon but more like a venomous snake. Tianxia's expression did not change. He looked at the golden-haired ape and sneered, "No wonder you dare to boast that you want to keep me here with your little strength and tricks. It turns out that you have already ambushed a helper. However, I find it a little strange. Why are there 2 God Emperor level beasts in this unknown place?" As the saying goes, a flash cannot accommodate 2 tigers, unless one is male and the other is female. If the two of you are jointly in charge of this territory unless you ha ha ha. Although it was a sneer, it was filled with mischief and ridicule. Both the golden-haired ape and the dragon-shaped beast were enraged, their bodies bursting with anger. The dragon-shaped beast in particular was glaring angrily. Purple flames burned all over its body, revealing its murderous intent. It glanced at Ji Tianxing, then at the golden-haired ape and said, "Sky Splitter, I told you before, why waste your time and breath on this person? From the beginning, you and I should have joined forces to severely injure him before bringing him back to be sealed." As it spoke, the dragon-shaped beast released a 5-colored poisonous fog that covered the sky, covering a radius of 30,000 miles. It also released the heavenly Tao's divine power to suppress Ji Tianxing. It clearly did not have much patience. It only wanted to use the simplest and most violent method to quickly capture Ji Tianxing. The golden-haired ape hesitated for a moment and could not help but remind, "Yanli, don't underestimate this flood tribe member. He is not weaker than me." The dragon-shaped beast named Yanli snorted disdainfully. Clearly, it did not take Ji Tianxing seriously, nor did it take the golden-haired ape's reminder to heart. After all, it was slightly stronger than Sky Splitter. Sky Splitter could not defeat Ji Tianxing, but that did not mean it could not. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Sky Splitter had also accumulated a vast amount of divine power and used a powerful killer move. It released hundreds of divine power light pillars that blasted towards Ji Tianxing. Not only did Yanli release purple lightning and 5-colored poisonous swords, but it also released dozens of golden whirlwinds that blocked all of Ji Tianxing's escape routes. Moreover, it stretched out its sharp claws and pounced towards Ji Tianxing, launching the most ferocious attack. Sky Splitter and Yanli attacked at the same time, attacking Ji Tianxing from the front and back. Immediately, the surrounding tens of thousands of miles became a dazzling battlefield. Ji Tianxing hurriedly took out the Sword of Burial of Heaven and used the omnidirectional shadows to block and counterattack. This area was enveloped by 5-colored divine light. It was chaotic and could not be seen with the naked eye. All kinds of divine light shadows collided fiercely in the sky, creating deafening explosions that shook the heavens and the earth. Ji Tianxing and his 9 doppelgangers cooperated perfectly and had unparalleled teamwork. They worked together to form a battle formation and gathered their strongest power to form a defensive shield, trying their best to block Sky Splitter and Yanli's attacks. However, Sky Splitter and Yanli also cooperated very well and their strength was deeper. This unknown land was their territory, and they had the home field advantage when fighting here. They had an endless supply of power. After the two sides exchanged a few hundred blows, Ji Tianxing's divine power was quickly depleted, and his combat ability began to decline. He was gradually unable to hold on. With his strength and methods, he had a chance to remain undefeated against Sky Splitter and Yanli alone. However, if Sky Splitter and Yanli joined forces to deal with him, he would only be defeated. There was absolutely no chance of victory. However, even if he was defeated, he could guarantee his own safety. At most, he would suffer some light injuries and his life would not be in danger. Sky Splitter and Yanli's combat ability was very strong, and their innate abilities were also very powerful. They were not like the desolate race experts of the various temples who lacked combat experience. As ferocious beasts and divine beasts, they had fought their way out of the encirclement of beasts since they were young, and had experienced countless battles. However, they were not good at setting up arrays, nor did they have brilliant joint attacks, nor did they refine powerful emperor-level divine weapons. This was their biggest shortcoming and flaw. Therefore, they could defeat Ji Tianxing, but they might not be able to trap and capture him. After the two sides exchanged nearly 100 blows, Ji Tianxing began to change his strategy. He no longer blindly defended and resisted and began to retreat as he fought. He constantly shifted the battlefield and fled towards the east. Sky Splitter and Yanli saw through his intentions and plans, and they sped up the pace of their attacks. They pursued him relentlessly without any regard for the cost. They were well aware that Ji Tianxing's strength was inferior to theirs, but he was proficient in all kinds of divine powers. He could use all kinds of methods to dodge and break down their attacks. Once Ji Tianxing escaped from the encirclement, both sides would be more than 300,000 miles apart. Then it would be very difficult for them to capture Ji Tianxing again. Therefore, while Yanli desperately tried to intercept Ji Tianxing, he also used his divine powers to send a message. he ordered the ferocious beasts and divine beasts that were lying in ambush in advance to quickly form an encirclement. Chapter 45-26. Unknowingly an hour had passed. Ji Tianxing had already exchanged more than 3,000 moves with Lai Tian and Yan Li. He had used all kinds of divine abilities and consummate skills once. The battlefield had also shifted 8 million miles, leaving behind countless ruins along the way. Lai Tian and Yan Li had only expended a large amount of divine power, leaving a dozen wounds on their huge bodies. These minor injuries were nothing to them. It didn't affect them from continuing to fight. On the contrary, Ji Tianxing's situation wasn't too good. Not only did he expend a large amount of divine power, but his body was also injured. Of course, it was still considered a minor injury. It hadn't reached the stage of serious injury, so it didn't affect his combat power much. But this was only temporary. If he couldn't get rid of Lai Tian and Yan Li's pursuit, his divine power would be exhausted sooner or later, and his injuries would continue to worsen. In desperation, Ji Tianxing could only look for an opportunity. At the cost of adding 2 more wounds, he fought for time to use so close, yet worlds apart consummate skill. Swish. His body flashed with white light and he instantly disappeared without a trace. Lai Tian and Yan Li were shocked as they revealed a look of disbelief. Under the suppression of their divine power, the surrounding tens of thousands of miles of space was sealed. Ji Tianxing actually teleported away. This was simply too unbelievable. In the next moment, Ji Tianxing appeared 100,000 miles away, temporarily getting rid of Lai Tian and Yan Li's suppression. But after Lai Tian and Yan Li used their divine senses to detect his location, they instantly felt relieved and even sneered. Because they had already arranged more than 1,000 godly king realm ferocious beasts and divine beasts to intercept in 3 directions, forming a huge encirclement. If Ji Tianxing teleported to the east to escape, he would only fall into their trap. As expected, Ji Tianxing used so close, yet worlds apart to teleport 100,000 miles away and finally got rid of Lai Tian and Yan Li. He didn't expect that after flying for another 10,000 miles, his divine senses would detect a group of godly king realm ferocious beasts in front of him. They were charging over with murderous intent. There were more than 100 ferocious beasts. They weren't charging in a disorderly manner but in an orderly manner. They even lined up in a line of defense. Evidently, the ferocious beast had received an order to intercept him. Ji Tianxing extended the senses of his soul to the left and right. He discovered that there were 2 more groups of God King feral beasts hurrying over as well. 3 batches of ferocious beasts, nearly 500 of them, blocked his path. Ji Tianxing frowned. His eyes flashed with killing intent as he continued to fly forward. In just a few breaths, he had collided with over 100 ferocious beasts. Those ferocious beasts were around LV7 or LV8 Divine King Realm. Although they were not strong enough to kill Ji Tianxing, they had the advantage in numbers and were not afraid of death. Boom boom boom. Rumble. Over 100 ferocious beasts rushed towards Ji Tianxing ferociously, using all kinds of innate abilities to attack Ji Tianxing. Some of the ferocious beasts even dashed towards him, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as if they wanted to perish together with him. Ji Tianxing could only attack from both sides. His right hand wielded the sword of Burial of Heaven, using all kinds of sword skills, while his left hand punched out a sky full of fist radiance and palm shadows. The 2 sides clashed fiercely, creating earth-shattering explosions and destructive shockwaves. Ji Tianxing was like a burning meteor smashing into the mountains and forests. Those God King ferocious beasts were like mountains and forests that were smashed into pieces and burned into ashes. In just one exchange, 6 ferocious beasts were mercilessly smashed into pieces by Ji Tianxing. After 2 rounds, another dozen ferocious beasts were slashed into pieces by his sword. Those ferocious beasts fought with all their might, but they could not hurt Ji Tianxing at all. Logically speaking, this was a battle of unequal strength. The remaining ferocious beasts should feel fear and quickly be defeated. However, they were ferocious beasts, not desolate race god spirits. They were uneducated, ferocious and bloodthirsty. They did not know what fear was. Even though their companions were constantly being killed and smashed into pieces by sword beams, they did not stop attacking and charging. This was the reason why Lai Tian and Yan Li put them in an important position. No matter how strong Ji Tianxing was, It was difficult for him to break out of the encirclement in a short period of time when he was surrounded by a group of ferocious beasts that were not afraid of death. Even if he was strong and had all kinds of means, he would be able to break out of the encirclement in 10 breaths, breaking through the encirclement of the ferocious beasts. However, the purpose of the ferocious beasts charging was to delay for 10 breaths of time. This 10 breaths of time was enough for Lai Tian and Yan Li to rush over and intercept Ji Tianxing again. Kid, don't even think of escaping. Stay behind. You can't escape. Lai Tian and Yan Li roared angrily and once again used their special abilities to attack Ji Tianxing from the front and back. After they held back Ji Tianxing, the remaining hundreds of ferocious beasts joined the battle and ferociously besieged him. Not long after, more than 300 ferocious beasts rushed over from the left and right. They also joined the battle without a word. Ji Tianxing was completely surrounded. There were ferocious beasts in all directions and he was completely surrounded. It was truly impossible for him to escape even if he had wings. No matter how hard he tried to break out of the encirclement, killing batch after batch of ferocious beasts and constantly advancing towards the east, he was ultimately unable to escape Lai Tian and Yan Li's pincer attack. 15 minutes later, the battlefield shifted 1,000,000 miles to the east. Nearly half of the ferocious beasts that besieged Ji Tianxing had been killed. There were still more than 200 left. Lai Tian and Yan Li's divine bodies also had a few new wounds. They were so deep that their bones could be seen. Purple or black blood constantly dripped from them. However, Ji Tianxing's strength had been greatly depleted. His combat strength had clearly decreased and his appearance was in a sorry state. His white robe was ragged. Moreover, his body was covered in blood. His wounds had worsened. At this moment, the battle between the two sides finally stopped. Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven in his hand. He stood in the sky and panted silently. He used his energy to nurse his wounds and restore his god power quickly. Lai Tian and Yan Li stood in front of him and behind him. They were 100 miles away from him, but they had always locked on his aura. More than 200 ferocious beasts that were lucky enough to survive also surrounded him from all directions. They bared their fangs and glared at him with murderous eyes. Yan Li opened its mouth to talk. Its cold eyes gazed at Ji Tianxing. It spoke in a low, dignified voice. Kid, you've lost. Just give up. Ji Tianxing wore an emotionless face. He didn't answer, but he secretly treated his wounds. Lai Tian saw that Zhou Xian's attitude was still tough and he didn't want to give in. He advised him. Although I admit that you're strong and gifted, you should know that. However, you should be aware that if you continue fighting, you will definitely lose your life. This is our territory. We have countless people. They're not afraid of death. Surrender. It's not our intention to kill you. You just need to follow us back and complete our mission. We promise to return your freedom and let you go. Chapter 45-27. Even though Ji Tianxing's injuries were getting worse and he was surrounded by Lai Tian and Yan Li, he was still calm. In fact, if Lai Tian and Yan Li wanted to kill him, he would use his trump card. If he tried his best, he still had the chance to escape. Although Lai Tian and Yan Li were strong, they had obvious weaknesses. They didn't know many supernatural techniques. They were good at fighting, but they weren't good at sealing and chasing. Today, Lai Tian and Yan Li had the upper hand. They had the upper hand, but they didn't kill him. They still wanted to persuade Ji Tianxing to surrender. This caused Ji Tianxing to be suspicious. What exactly was their true objective? You don't want to kill me, but you want to take me back. You want to imprison me for 100 years? Tell me, what do you want? If you don't make it clear, why would I go with you? Lai Tian and Yan Li's abnormal behavior made Ji Tianxing curious. He wanted to figure it out. Hearing Ji Tianxing's question, Lai Tian and Yan Li exchanged looks, but they didn't want to answer him. Ji Tianxing held his sword in front of him, talking with an indifferent face. If you don't answer, we will fight to the death. I want to see if you have any other tricks. What qualifications and confidence do you have to keep me here? In simple words, if Lai Tian and Yan Li couldn't explain it clearly, Ji Tianxing couldn't go back with them. If they could explain clearly that they didn't want to kill him, but had other ideas or requests, Ji Tianxing could consider it. However, Lai Tian and Yan Li were vague, which made people confused. Ji Tianxing felt that he had to try his best to break out of this siege. Seeing him accumulate god power and emit a thick murderous aura, Lai Tian and Yanli knew that it was almost impossible to subdue him. They didn't have any deep hatred. If a fierce battle happened because of a misunderstanding, no one would get the upper hand in the end. The death of more than 200 King God Realm beasts was still within the range that Lai Tian and Yanli could accept. If the situation escalated and there were more casualties, it would be hard to say. Most importantly, Sky Split and Yanli were clearly aware in their hearts that if they really forced Ji Tianqing into a hopeless situation and he utilized his trump card, then they might not be able to stop him. Therefore Lai Tian and Yanli looked at each other, discussed in secret and made up their minds. It wasn't convenient for Yanli to speak. After all, its appearance was very ferocious. It was suitable for deterring the other party, but not suitable for negotiating. On the other hand, the appearance of the golden-haired ape Heaven Splitter was much gentler in comparison. It stared at Ji Tianqing and said in a calm and low voice, "Actually, we never thought of killing you from the very beginning. The reason why we did this was because we had no other choice. After all, it's impossible for you to agree even if we discuss it with you. We have no choice but to beat you into submission first and then ask you to come back with us and do something for us." Ji Tianqing helplessly rolled his eyes. What kind of bandit logic was this? However, it was possible to reason with the desolate race's gods, but there was no need to reason with these beasts and divine beasts. Their philosophy and creed was very simple. That was, whoever had the bigger fist was right. They could control and demand the other party. Ji Tianqing temporarily did not argue with them about the right or wrong of this point of view. Just based on the current situation, if he did not want to fight to the death, it seemed like he could only reconcile with them. Therefore he patiently asked the golden-haired ape Lion, "Tell me, what do you want? What do you want this emperor to help you with?" Lai Tian hesitated for a moment, as if he was considering if he should reveal some unknown secret. However, Yanli seriously considered it and nodded at Lai Tian. Lai Tian immediately gained confidence and did not hesitate any longer. He said to Ji Tianqing, "Actually, you don't have to worry too much. We will not deprive you of anything. Actually, with your intelligence and wisdom you should have guessed it. As living beings born from the laws of the Khanate Tao, we have yet to be educated. We do not have any etiquette, so we naturally do not have much heritage to speak of. We are not like those flood race beings who have the mercy of the heavens. They have words, etiquette and learned all kinds of divine powers. Ignoring cultivation techniques, we do not lack those things. With our own talent we can absorb the heaven and earth powers. The main thing is refining weapons, setting up arrays, etc. It is definitely not something we can research in seclusion." Previously, Ji Tianqing had guessed that Lai Tian and Yanli wanted to capture him because they were unable to set up arrays. After all, Lai Tian even wanted a supreme-grade king-ranked god-slaying battleship. This did not match its strength at all. Now Lai Tian's explanation verified Ji Tianqing's guess. That's right, the reason why Lai Tian and Yanli intercepted him and wanted to capture him and imprison him for 100 years was to obtain the methods to refine weapons and set up arrays. Although their strength was very high, they could not be like the desolate race beings who were able to refine weapons and set up arrays, etc. They had also thought of negotiating with the desolate race beings to learn the corresponding techniques and knowledge from them. However, the desolate race beings had already formed a deep-rooted concept. They were extremely vigilant and guarded against the fierce beasts. Once they came into contact with them, they would start a fight. Skysplitter and Loathing couldn't leave the unknown lands and travel to the territory of a certain temple to learn what they wanted. This was because they were extremely dangerous targets in the eyes of the desolate race beings. Once their traces and auras were exposed, they would be besieged by the temple's forces. Helplessly, Lai Tian and Yanli could only stay in the unknown land and capture the desolate race beings who barged in and imprisoned them. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly. He understood Lai Skysplit and Yanli's actions and asked, "Over the years, you must have captured many gods and imprisoned them, right?" Lai Tian nodded and explained, "Every year there will be many God-King realm desolate race warriors who barge into our territory and are captured by us as slaves. However, we only want the methods to refine weapons and set up arrays that they have mastered. We will try our best not to harm their lives. Every slave can only work for 100 years before we release them, allowing them to regain their freedom." Ji Tianqing pricked his eyebrows and muttered to himself, 100 years is enough for you to squeeze those desolate race god-kings dry and learn the techniques they have mastered. It's no wonder this emperor saw some fierce beasts and divine beasts using weapons. They were even equipped with armor and life-saving divine weapons. This emperor thought that you had killed many desolate race gods and snatched them from their hands. Now, from the looks of it, you must have learned the methods to refine weapons and develop them yourself, right? Lai Tian hurriedly nodded in agreement. He explained to Ji Tianqing how much they yearned to master the methods to refine weapons and set up arrays. They hoped that Ji Tianqing could help them. Chapter 45-28. Previously, both sides were at loggerheads with murderous intent. Now that everything was said and explained clearly, the atmosphere gradually calmed down. The negotiation was still carried out by Lai Tian. Yanli listened silently and gave the order to disperse the surrounding beasts. Those godly king realm beasts and divine beasts were still murderous and ferocious. After receiving Yanli's order, they immediately restrained their killing intent and anger. They silently turned and left, quickly disappearing into the horizon. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing put away the burial of Heaven's sword and began discussing with Lai Tian. Since when did you capture the desolate race gods that intruded into your territory and extract what you want from them? About 1,000 years ago. Sky Splitter answered without hesitation. Before that, we could rely on our own talent and bloodline to cultivate and become stronger. But later, more and more desolate race gods intruded into our territory, wantonly plundering our cultivation resources and killing our people. Although our people are not weak and have all kinds of innate abilities and ultimate skills, they are not weak. But compared to those desolate race gods, we are always at a disadvantage. Over countless years, our people have fought countless battles with the desolate race gods, but we have lost more than we won. We know the crux of the problem, but we are powerless to change it. Or rather, we are unable to change it in a short period of time. Ji Tianqing nodded to indicate that he understood and continued. So, you want to learn refining and array formation techniques from the desolate race gods, so as to deal with them and protect your people. You are no longer blindly killing those desolate race gods. Instead, you are capturing them and imprisoning them. You are learning the desolate race's language and writing from those desolate race gods, as well as refining and array formation techniques. Although it takes a long time to see results, it can solve the problem fundamentally. Only by grasping the corresponding techniques can you strengthen all your people and fight against the various temples. Lai Tian revealed a wry smile and explained, it's not that we want to fight against those temples, but we want to strengthen ourselves and protect ourselves. We are the first living beings to exist in this world. We are blessed with talent and bloodline, but we do not have the wisdom and means of the desolate race gods. They were developing too quickly, constantly expanding their territory, wantonly plundering all the resources and treasures. In fact, they even treat us, the ancient era's living beings, as targets to be hunted and treasures to be seized. My godhead, my body, my bones, my eyes, and my blood are all priceless treasures to them. Even though Sky Splitter was a god emperor, one of the most powerful living beings in this world, he was still a god emperor. But when it said these words, its tone was still filled with frustration, helplessness, and resentment. It was obvious that in the past tens of thousands of years, it must have seen too many ferocious beasts and divine beasts being hunted and dismembered by the desolate race's gods, turning into various materials and treasures. The desolate race's god's spirit thought of himself as the master of the planet of origin. All the beasts and divine beasts were prey, targets for him to plunder. However, these ferocious beasts and divine beasts also had intelligence and thought. They were the first race to live on the planet of origin. Naturally, they were unwilling to be oppressed and hunted. After understanding these twists and turns, Ji Tianqing felt a trace of sympathy for the ferocious beasts and mythical beasts. But most importantly, he could understand and agree with Sky Splitter's thoughts and actions. Sky Splitter, since you hate the desolate race's god spirit so much, why didn't you kill them after capturing them and enslaving them for 100 years? Why did you let them go? Ji Tianqing looked sharply at Sky Splitter and asked this very sharp question. Although Sky Splitter and Yanli gave him the impression that they were the type who were easy to see through, they were not shrewd or scheming. But one had to be wary of others. He could never truly trust Sky Splitter and Yanli. As the old saying goes, those who are not of the same race are bound to have different intentions. A helpless and bitter smile flashed in Sky Splitter's eyes again. He explained, in fact, those desolate races God's spirit treat our people as prey. For 90,000 years they have killed countless of our people. Even if we killed every invader, it would be justified and there would be nothing wrong with it. However, to our west is the Kongming Temple and to our east is the Xianxia Temple. No matter which one of them, their power and heritage far surpass ours. If we were to kill all the invading desolate races' God's spirit, many a little makes an ocean, and we would definitely become enemies with the two great temples, causing a large-scale war to break out. When that happens, we will definitely not be a match for the two great temples. We will definitely be severely injured or even completely destroyed. Skysplitter's words implied that their power and heritage were too weak, so they did not dare to offend the two great temples too much. Hence, no matter how much they hated the people of the two great temples, they could only swallow their anger and think of ways to strengthen themselves first. This explanation was rather reasonable. Tianxing nodded and continued, "There isn't much problem with your train of thought and plan. However, by capturing those God-King realm desolate races' God spirit, you can only learn some superficial methods of refining weapons, setting up arrays and refining pills. Even if you have mastered those basic magical powers and spells, it will take a long time to master them and comprehend the mystic techniques of the God Emperor realm." Skysplitter nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. For more than 1,000 years, I have learned more than 3,000 methods of refining pills, refining weapons and setting up arrays. After filtering and summarizing, I finally summed them up to more than 1,500 methods, which I focused on cultivation and research. However, until now I can only set up a king-level array. I can't even refine a battleship or divine pill of the same level." Tianxing glanced at him with sympathy in his eyes and said, "Is it the boundless auspicious cloud array that you set up previously? Forget it, that thing can't even be considered a king-level array. It can't even be considered a large array." Skysplitter's expression suddenly became very awkward and he felt ashamed. However, in the face of Tianxing, an expert who was proficient in arrays, he could not refute. At this moment, Yanli flew over from afar and said in a low voice, "We have explained the matter clearly and you have seen our sincerity. Now please come back with us and help us. Don't worry, as long as you fulfill your promise we will not hurt you." As if he was afraid that Tianxing still had some concerns and doubts, Skysplitter added, "Although we hate the desolate race's God spirit, we are also afraid of the Kongming Temple and the Xianxia Temple. However, we can tell that you are different from them. Furthermore, I have carefully observed the route that you took and I have a bold guess. Not only do you have no relationship with the Kongming Temple, you might even have a grudge against them." After saying that, Skysplitter stared at Tianxing and asked, "Am I right?" Chapter 45-29. Skysplitting's words made Tianxing understand one thing. Before Skysplitting showed up and took action, Skysplitting had been eyeing the god-slaying battleship and secretly following it for a long time. Because of the ample time, Skysplitting could arrange in advance and mobilize so many King God Realm beasts and divine beasts to block Tianxing's path. At the same time, Skysplitting only gave people the impression that it was simple and honest, but it didn't mean that it wasn't shrewd. Skysplitting could infer that Tianxing had enmity with the Kongming Temple through the god-slaying battleship's concealed tracks and route, which was enough to prove that it had the corresponding wisdom and knowledge. Tianxing smiled and said, "You don't have to worry about me and the Kongming Temple. The Kongming Temple has a blood feud with you, but we have no enmity with each other. So, if you want to learn the God Emperor's array, alchemy and artifact forging techniques, you can only cooperate with me." On the surface, Skysplitting and Yanli had defeated Tianxing and forced him to teach them the array, artifact forging techniques and array techniques. However, Tianxing had a clear understanding of Skysplitting and Yanli's mentality. After understanding their situation, he found the initiative instead of being passive. Skysplitting immediately frowned, while Yanli raised his eyebrows and asked in a low voice, "Cooperate? Don't forget that you should cooperate with us and be used by us." Tianxing sneered and said, "If you still can't adjust your mentality, it will be difficult for me to continue cooperating with you. At worst, we can continue to fight and chase." Yanli's pupils shrank and his body emitted a cold, killing intent. He said in a low voice, "Don't forget that you were defeated by us. Even if we fight again, you are no match for us." Tianxing spread out his hands and said with a smile, "If we fight again, you can't trap me. Try me if you don't believe me." Yanli's anger flared up as if he wanted to fight again. Sky Splitting hurriedly stopped him and advised him to calm down and calm down. Yanli, don't be impulsive and don't let your emotions affect your decisions. Don't forget that he's the most suitable target we've encountered over the years. If we miss this goal, we might have to wait for another 1,000 years. The targets that Sky Splitter and Loathing were looking for were naturally God Emperor realm powerhouses. It was only from those God Emperors that they could learn Emperor-level alchemy, artifact forging and array formation techniques. On the other hand, the God Emperor of the two temples were all temple masters. Normally they lived like princes and would not enter the unknown lands even once in a few thousand years. They couldn't possibly charge into the territories of the two great temples to capture those God Emperor-level temple masters. Therefore Tianxia could be said to be their only chance. No matter how angry Yanli was, he could still distinguish the importance of the matter. He wouldn't ruin his long-term plan just because of a moment of anger. Finally, Yanli calmed down under the persuasion of Heaven Splitter. He remained silent and ignored Tianxia. Sky Splitter personally negotiated with Tianxia and said in a sincere tone, "Your Excellency is already clear about our goal. If Your Excellency insists on defining this as a collaboration, we can also discuss it. However, we need to know what your conditions are. If Your Excellency's conditions and requests are too excessive, then we can't agree. In the end, we can only rely on force to solve the problem." Since Sky Splitter had made a concession, Tianxia naturally had to state his conditions and take advantage of the situation to continue the discussion. Since it's a collaboration, then it must be mutually beneficial and built on the premise of mutual respect. Without these two prerequisites, then there's no point in talking about our collaboration. If you want to learn Emperor-level array formation techniques, alchemy and artifact forging techniques, this Emperor can teach you all these and guarantee that I'll teach you all. However, this Emperor also has a condition, and that is, you need to provide this Emperor with some top-grade artifact forging materials. This Emperor wants to personally forge an Emperor-level artifact. In addition, this Emperor still has important matters to attend to, so I can't stay here for too long. At most, after 3 years, regardless of whether you've learned it or not or how much you've learned, this Emperor will leave. As soon as Tianxia's voice fell, Yanli's eyes widened in anger. Unable to restrain her anger, she shouted coldly, "In your dreams. Is this a collaboration? What kind of *T condition is this? This is too much." Sky Splitter also frowned and couldn't help but raise his long arm to rub his forehead. He revealed a bitter smile to Tianxia and said, "Kid, your request is indeed a little too much. You want us to provide you with top-grade artifact forging materials, and you only want to stay for 3 years. This doesn't seem like you've been defeated, but more like we've been defeated by you." Tianxia had already guessed that they would have this reaction, so he said with a serious expression, "Within 3 years, this Emperor will teach you all 300 types of alchemy, artifact forging and array formation techniques, and I guarantee that I'll teach you all." After speaking, he raised his right hand and formed a seal. With a wave of his hand, hundreds of divine sword lights shot out. Shoo! Thu! 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 More than 800 sword lights shot out and crisscrossed in the sky. In a breath's time, they formed a sword net that covered a radius of thousands of miles, forming a sword array. Suddenly, it was as if a huge golden ball of light had appeared between heaven and earth. It was bright and eye-catching. The crisscrossing golden sword lights were extremely sharp and released a frightening sword intent. Seeing Tianxia raise his hand to form a sword array, Sky Splitter and Yanli were stunned. His actions were so relaxed that it was like moving clouds and flowing water. Although the two of them weren't good at arrays, they could tell that it was a supreme-grade king-level sword array. Sky Splitter had studied it for many years and learned how to set up arrays from countless desolate race gods, but he still couldn't set up an exquisite supreme-grade king-level array. However, Tianxia could form a sword array of such a grade with a wave of his hand and a snap of his fingers. It was obvious how profound his array attainments were. Sky Splitter and Yanli were stunned and shocked. They didn't speak for a long time. Tianxia didn't rush them. He looked at them quietly and waited for their answer. As expected. After all, it was this move that shocked Sky Splitter and Yanli. At the same time, Sky Splitter and Yanli were too eager to learn about arrays, refining weapons and alchemy. The two of them looked at each other for a moment and discussed with voice transmissions. Finally, Sky Splitter agreed to Tianxia's conditions. "Good. We can agree to your conditions. 3 years later I want to be like you, forming a divine array with a snap of my fingers. Are you confident that you can do it? Sky Splitter stared at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of expectation. Ji Tianxing revealed a playful smile and said, "What's so difficult about that?" "Very good." Sky Splitter and Yanli were finally relieved. The worry and apprehension in their hearts dissipated instantly. Then, under Ji Tianxing's request, the two sides formed an alliance and recited the oath together. Sky Splitter and Yanli wanted to use the ancient oath of the beast race to express their sincerity and determination. However, under Ji Tianxing's strong request, both sides swore in the name of the Heavenly Way and formed the Heavenly Way Alliance. Chapter 45-30. In fact, to Lai Tian and Yen Li, the ancient oath of the Beast clan was more intimidating. They were creatures born in ancient times, and their reverence for their ancestors and bloodline was more than anything else. They didn't have much reverence for the illusory Heavenly Way. But Ji Tianxing asked them to form an alliance in the name of the Heavenly Way. Firstly, he trusted the binding power of the Heavenly Way. Secondly, he did it on purpose. He wanted to test the Heavenly Way's power on the planet of origin and see if there was any difference between it and the Heavenly Way's power in the God realm and the outer realms. The result was obvious. When he, Lai Tian, and Yen Li formed the Heavenly Way Alliance, there was an earth-shattering thunder in the sky, and a phenomenon that lasted for tens of thousands of years appeared. Ji Tianxing could clearly feel that the Heavenly Way's power was extremely abundant, almost condensing and enveloping them. It turned out that the Heavenly Way's power on the planet of origin was far more intense than anywhere else. Perhaps the origin of the Heavenly Way also came from this planet? This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. After the alliance was formed, the cooperation between the two sides was established. Then Lai Tian and Yen Li took Ji Tianxing and rushed to their nest. Lai Tian had the appearance of a golden-haired ape, while Yen Li's appearance was more like a winged serpent, and it was naturally more suitable for flying and attacking. So, Yen Li naturally became a means of transportation. Not only was Ji Tianxing standing on its back, but even the 1,000-foot-tall golden-haired ape was standing on its broad back. Fortunately, Yen Li's body was big enough. Its body was tens of thousands of feet long, so the golden-haired ape standing on its back didn't look out of place. Swoosh. Yen Li was silent. It flew into the sky expressionlessly, turned into a stream of light and went straight to the northwest. It traveled as fast as lightning, crossing thousands of mountains and rivers. Along the way, Ji Tianxing saw countless ferocious beasts and divine beasts between the mountains and the earth. No matter what those ferocious beasts and divine beasts were doing, as long as they sensed the auras of sky-splitting and loathing, they all stopped what they were doing and knelt down respectfully in worship. From Ji Tianxing's point of view, even if the temple masters of the Kongming Temple appeared in the territory of the dozens of branches, the people might not be able to recognize them, let alone kneel and worship them. He really didn't know how Lai Tian and Yen Li did it. They were actually able to make the millions of ferocious beasts and divine beasts in the unknown land feel reverence from the bottom of their souls. Perhaps there was a natural suppression of the beast's bloodline? Along the way, Yen Li kept silent. Ji Tianxing and Sky Lai would talk to each other occasionally to ask about the general situation of the beast race. This unknown land was larger than the territories of the Kongming Temple and the Shangqing Temple. The number of ferocious beasts and divine beasts living there far exceeded the number of people in the two temples. Even Heaven Splitting and Yen Li couldn't tell how many beast race clansmen they had under their command. Almost 99% of the ferocious beasts and divine beasts still maintained their primitive habits. They lived in forests, cliffs, mountain streams, or in natural caves. Only an extremely small number of godly monarch realm divine beasts would use their divine powers to open up cave abodes in the vast heaven and earth. Of course, those cave abodes were very crude and simple. They were far from being comparable to the cave abodes built by the desolate race. Ji Tianxing couldn't help but guess that Lai Tian and Yen Li's lair was probably in a dangerous place. All they had to do was dig out a few cave abodes. 2 days later, Yen Li carried Ji Tianxing and Sky Lai back to their lair. Facts had proven that Ji Tianxing had underestimated Lai Tian and Yen Li's enterprising spirit. Their lair was indeed in between the vast mountain ranges and the rivers. It spanned a radius of 5,000 kilometers, and they had used various means to encircle it. And in this 5,000 kilometers of mountains and rivers, They had built huge palaces and pavilions on more than 20 mountain peaks. Many of the mountain peaks and rivers weren't in their original state. They had used their divine powers to adjust them, transforming them into even more magnificent scenery. For example, there were colorful rainbow bridges that spanned across the sky, connecting two large mountains that were thousands of kilometers apart. There were floating pavilions that stood above the surging rivers and below the cliffs that were shrouded in clouds, absorbing the divine powers of the heaven and earth to their heart's content. Although the buildings and array formations in this region weren't exquisite enough, and were even somewhat crude. But from this, it could be seen that Lai Tian and Yanli truly wanted to learn the skills of the desolate race's god, so as to change the lifestyles and cultivation methods of the beast race. In addition, Ji Tianxing discovered that the array formations and palaces had the unique style of the desolate race. He immediately understood that the transformation work in this region was mostly done by the desolate race's slaves. Yanli stopped high in the sky and looked down at the world thousands of kilometers below. Lai Tian pointed at the magnificent scenery around him and introduced it to Ji Tianxing. Longtian, this is our lair. No, it should be called a capital city. We have named this place Li City. Li City? Ji Tianxing repeated the name and felt like laughing. Lai Tian was a little embarrassed. Before he could speak, he said, I know that our Li City is still very simple at present. It's far from comparable to the desolate race's cities. But we have been constantly learning skills from the desolate race's living beings. One day we will build this place into a bustling and beautiful city. Ji Tianxing stared at Sky Splitter. When he saw it say these words, his bright eyes revealed a strong sense of confidence and determination. He knew that Lai Tian would definitely do what he said. However, he could not help but ask, the beast race has their own habits and lifestyles. They have been here since ancient times, so why must you learn the lifestyles of the desolate race? Lai Tian was stunned for a moment, as though he was surprised that Ji Tianxing would ask such a question. However, he still explained seriously, the desolate race has mastered more exquisite skills, making their people's combat strength stronger. We beast race do not want to be bullied, nor do we want to become the prey of the various temples. We can only learn from them and become stronger. Besides, we are also living beings of this world. What's the difference between us and them? What gives them the right to dominate this world while we can only be prey? We can't accept it. If the desolate race can do it, we can do it too. We are equal. Ji Tianxing absolutely believed that Lai Tian's words were from the bottom of his heart. When he said those words, it was a cry from the bottom of his heart. Ji Tianxing fell silent. Lai Tian's words had stirred his heart. Seeing him remain silent, Lai Tian sighed and asked, Do you think that we are just a bunch of uncivilized wild beasts that drink raw meat and drink blood? To think that we are on equal footing with the desolate race, is that really ridiculous? Because of the limitations of our race's bloodline, we are born as lowly wild beasts and should be treated as prey? Before Ji Tianxing could answer, Lai Tian said in a self-deprecating tone, That's right. If you think that way, it's only natural. Because it's not only you, all the desolate race's living beings and even many of my people think so too. Chapter 45-31. The ferocious beasts and divine beasts of unknown lands were all beasts without intelligence. They were equivalent to prey and food. This was the common understanding of the desolate race. In fact, after tens of thousands of years of subtle influence, many ferocious beasts and divine beasts had tacitly agreed on this idea. However, Lai Tian and Yanli were the strongest among the billions of divine beasts. They were also the patriarchs with the longest lifespans. They had their own ideas and they were completely different from ordinary ferocious beasts and divine beasts. After Sky Splitter finished speaking, Ji Tianxing finally spoke. Maybe all the living beings in the desolate race as well as many of the people under you think so. However, this emperor can understand your thoughts and your determination. There is an ancient saying that all living things have spirits. Maybe in the eyes of the heavenly Tao, all living things are the same. They are all equal and there is no difference in status. To this emperor, be it the desolate race or you and the beast race, they are all living things of a different race. And in your eyes, this emperor is also a different race. Hence the heavenly Tao is fair. We all have the right to live in this world. The heavens gave the desolate race intelligence and creativity, but gave the beast race powerful bloodlines and the ability to reproduce. These are things that the other party does not have. Furthermore, the heavens give all living things the ability to cultivate and become stronger, but they also give all living things hardship and set a limit to their lifespans. Ji Tianqing's words made Lai Tian's eyes turn gentle as his heart calmed down. He looked seriously at Ji Tianqing and asked, "Is what you said true? In your eyes, is there really no difference between the beast race and the desolate race?" Ji Tianqing sighed and said, "Against the desolate race's god, this emperor has many things that cannot be said. But to all of you this emperor can reveal a little. You only know your own territory and the two divine temples in the east and west. You only know that there is a difference between the desolate race and the beast race. And on this emperor's journey, I have seen at least 8,000 races, if not 10,000. This emperor has seen all kinds of strange races. Who can give those 10,000 races a ranking of superiority and inferiority? Which race is born noble and which race is born lowly? None. Under the heavenly Tao, all living things have spirits and all living things are equal." Upon hearing the last sentence, not only was Lai Tian stunned, but even Yan Li's body trembled. The look in their eyes changed as they silently muttered those words. All living things have spirits and all living things are equal? Lai Tian and Yan Li were silent, as if they were carefully pondering over the meaning of those words. After a long while, Sky Splitter smiled and said, "I'm even more certain now that cooperating with you is the wisest choice." Li did not say a word but nodded its head. Moments later, Li landed on the tallest mountain peak of the mountain range. Covered the mountain of the desolate race. Of the Li. There were several buildings. There were several of them, of course, Of course, she only looked like a human. In fact, she was still imitating the body of a desolate race being. It was very difficult to change the characteristics of her race. Even after taking on human form, she still had a pair of black wings and a red bead on her forehead. Furthermore, she still looked somewhat ferocious. Her aura was still gloomy and cold. Lai Tian's true form was a 10,000 feet tall golden-haired ape, so it was not suitable for him to move about in the palaces and buildings. Therefore, he had shrunk his body, turning into a 10-foot tall golden-haired man. His body was very similar to a human's, but his face was still that of an ape. Ji Tianqing sized them up a few times and asked with a smile, "Their bodies should be 10,000 feet or 10,000 feet tall. However, due to imitating the lifestyles of the desolate race, they have to become this tiny. Only then can they enter the palaces and pavilions. You must be very uncomfortable with it, right?" If Lai Tian and Yan Li had expressed their affirmation, he would have taken the opportunity to persuade them to give up on learning and imitate the lifestyle of the desolate race. This was because from his point of view it was not necessary at all. However, Lai Tian answered without any hesitation, "In the first few decades, we were indeed not used to it. However, we have been practicing for hundreds of years, so we have slowly gotten used to it." Since they were already used to it and insisted on continuing, Ji Tianqing did not try to persuade them any further. The three of them walked into the relatively magnificent palace. Immediately many guards bowed and greeted them. Many maidservants came to serve them. Ji Tianqing took a look and realized that most of the guards and maidservants were godly king realm beasts or divine beasts. Only a small portion of them were desolate race slaves. Needless to say, the magnificent palace beneath their feet was built by the desolate race's godly kings. 2 hours later, Lai Tian and Yan Li gathered more than 10 divine beasts and beasts for a meeting in the meeting hall. These 18 divine beasts and beasts were the experts under their command. They were basically peak godly kings and were the lords of their respective regions. They had shrunk their bodies and appeared in the meeting hall in human form. By gathering in the hall for a meeting, they were of course imitating the desolate race's habits. Although it was called a meeting, it was actually Lai Tian introducing Ji Tianqing to the lords under his command and explaining Ji Tianqing's purpose for coming. In the next 3 years, Ji Tianqing would be the god emperor expert that they had specially invited. He would teach them all kinds of alchemy, refining weapons and setting up arrays. The 18 lords could announce in their territories that talented, intelligent and outstanding beasts could come to Li City to observe and learn. In addition, Lai Tian also ordered the 18 lords to do their best to search for top treasures and refining materials. The 18 lords acknowledged the order and left after the meeting ended. Following that, Lai Tian arranged a residence for Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing did not like to squeeze in a palace with so many divine beasts. Furthermore, the palace was rather simple and crude. Many of the arrays were of a lower level. Hence, Ji Tianxing revealed another skill in front of everyone. He controlled the heaven and earth divine powers, and in a short span of 4 hours, he created a palace with his own strength. Be it the bricks or beams used to build the palace, they were all condensed from the heaven and earth divine powers. And this palace, with a radius of 10,000 feet, under Ji Tianxing's meticulous carving, could be said to be magnificent and magnificent. After the palace was completed, he condensed seals and quickly built 6 divine arrays on top of the palace. They were used for defense, killing, sealing, and assisting in cultivation. Lai Tian, Yanli, and many divine beasts and ferocious beasts watched the completion of the palace with their own eyes. All of them feasted their eyes and exclaimed in amazement and wonder. Seeing the completed palace, Lai Tian's eyes lit up and he could not help but exclaim, "It's indeed an ingenious method. This is the divine palace we want." Without a doubt, Ji Tianxing's little trick had successfully shocked Lai Tian and Yanli. Seeing Lai Tian's delighted and excited look, Ji Tianxing hurriedly waved his hand and said, "This emperor can impart the art of creation to you. However, don't even think about having this emperor build a palace for you." Chapter 45-32. Ji Tianxing was afraid that Lai Tian would have this idea, so he sealed his mouth in advance to sever Lai Tian's thoughts. As expected, the joy in Lai Tian's eyes immediately dissipated, leaving behind a wry smile. "Long Tian, with your creation skills, you can build 100 of these divine palaces for us in 3 to 5 days. Why do you want us to spend so much time, and after learning, we can only build some defective products?" Ji Tianxing explained seriously. As the old saying goes, it's better to teach a man to fish than to give him a fish. You should understand this principle, or else you wouldn't think of ways to learn alchemy, refining weapons, and setting up arrays. Only when you learn these skills and methods can you continue to pass them down, and constantly improve and perfect them. If not, I can transform Li City into the scale you want in a month, and then you can leave. Lai Tian immediately understood what he meant and quickly nodded. He smiled and said, "You're right, I misspoke." Following that, Ji Tianxing used the divine array to place the divine palaces in the sky, above the sea of clouds. As such, he could overlook the entire Li City while staying in the divine palaces, and enjoy the beautiful scenery of the mountains and rivers. Lai Tian and Yanli were envious and envious. Many divine beasts and ferocious beasts turned into guards and maidservants, and they excitedly volunteered to serve Ji Tianxing. These beasts had simple thoughts, and they retained their naive and straightforward nature. Hence, they didn't have much concept of hierarchy. Even when facing Ji Tianxing, the god emperor of a foreign race, they didn't know how to respect or fear him. Even though Lai Tian and Yanli had taught them many etiquette and rules over the past few hundred years. These were the culture and etiquette of the desolate race, so it was difficult for the beasts to fully implement them. Ji Tianxing wasn't hypocritical, and he directly told the guards and maidservants that he liked peace and solitude, and he didn't need anyone to serve him. Lai Tian thought for a moment and felt that there was something lacking, so he arranged for 2 intelligent mystic cloud birds to guard Ji Tianxing's divine palaces, and carry out the mission of passing orders and running errands. After all, Ji Tianxing would have a lot of things to do in the next 3 years. As an expert of the god emperor, he couldn't do everything personally and take care of everything. Most of the time he only needed to issue orders. 2 quick-witted messengers were a must. Ji Tianxing understood Sky Splitter's intentions and did not reject its arrangement. On the second day after settling down in Li City, Lai Tian took Ji Tianxing to stroll around Li City. Although he said he was strolling, Ji Tianxing was actually observing the topography of the entire Li City and considering how to design a perfect city. In addition, he got Lai Tian to bring him to visit the desolate race slaves. Before the visit, Ji Tianxing was already mentally prepared. He guessed that there were dozens of desolate race godly monarchs staying in Li capital. He never expected to see more than 300 desolate race godly monarchs after Lai Tian brought him around Li City. These desolate race godly monarchs were working hard. They were either building palaces or designing cave abodes. There were also planting herbal fields and researching alchemy methods. There were even people excavating ore veins and smelting ores in preparation for refining artifacts. The hundreds of buildings in Li City were the fruits of labor of the desolate race godly monarchs. And many of the weapons and armor worn by the beasts were also created by the desolate race godly monarchs. As for the herb mountains that spanned tens of thousands of miles around Li City, there were a few special alchemy rooms that were designed by the desolate race godly monarchs. In short, all the desolate race godly monarchs had to follow Lai Tian's instructions and use all sorts of skills to slowly change the living environment and lifestyle of the beasts. These desolate race godly monarchs were strictly watched. They were not allowed to leave until they had worked for 100 years. When they saw Ji Tianxing, their first reaction was that another unlucky fellow had arrived. But when they looked at Ji Tianxing sympathetically and gloatingly, they realized that Ji Tianxing's aura was very powerful. Furthermore, as the 10,000 Beast King, Lai Tian's attitude towards Ji Tianxing was more respectful. This made the desolate race godly monarchs very shocked. They were all curious about Ji Tianxing's identity. Ji Tianxing did not stay for long, nor did he converse with the desolate race godly monarchs. After touring Li City once, he returned to his residence in the Divine Palace and began planning his future affairs. The Divine Palace's doors were tightly shut and he was the only one inside. Furthermore, there was an exquisite divine array protecting him, making it very well hidden. Lai Tian knew that he was considering important matters, so he did not disturb him. Instead, he arranged for the various territorial lords to bring their people to study as soon as possible. 3 years was too short for him. Time was too tight. Every day wasted made his heart ache. In the Divine Palace, the room was silent. Only the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda was floating in midair. Ji Tianxing had already entered the distorted spacetime and was talking to Yunyao, Jiku and the others. Tianxing, aren't you going to cross this unknown land and rush to the Shangqing Temple to seek revenge on the Azure God Emperor? Why did you come to this place where the beasts gather? Brother Tianxing, you must have your reasons for doing this, right? Yunyao and Jiku asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Bai Feng thought for a moment and asked in a low voice, "My lord, are you trying to rope in the beast race?" Chao Qingyu nodded in agreement and said with a smile, "We don't have any foundation in the Star of Origin. The 5 god emperors know how to join the various temples to look for backers and helpers. It's natural for young master to use some means to rope in the beast race. In the future we will seek revenge on the few god emperors so that we won't be at a disadvantage." Under everyone's gaze, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and explained, "Your guess is right, but this is only one of the reasons. Sky Splitter and Revulsion are very strong and I can't defeat them alone. Even if I want to escape from their siege and get rid of their entanglement, I'll have to pay a heavy price. I thought about it and felt that there was no need, so I agreed to help them. Anyway, they don't have any evil intentions, so I'll cooperate with them. Everyone gets what they need and we can also form good karma. In addition, I have a premonition that the Kongming Temple won't let this matter go. There will definitely be temple master level powerhouses chasing after me. If I blindly escape to the east, not only will I be entangled by Sky Splitter and Revulsion, but I'll also be schemed against and killed by the Kongming Temple. Therefore I came to Li City to borrow the power of the beast race to completely cut off the Kongming Temple's entanglement." After listening, everyone was enlightened. Jiku expressed his agreement and said, "Previously when Big Brother Tianxing fought with those temple masters, he was always at a disadvantage because he didn't have an emperor-level divine weapon. If we can borrow the power of the beast race to gather the materials needed to forge the burial of heaven into an emperor-level divine weapon, then we'll have a better chance." Yunyao seriously considered for a while and nodded. "This way we can kill many birds with one stone. It's indeed feasible. Moreover, 3 years is nothing to us. We can just take it as a rest." Chapter 45-33. After understanding Ji Tianxing's plan, everyone remained in the distorted space-time and cultivated in peace. Especially Yunyao and Jiku. They did not say anything on the surface, but they were feeling the pressure in their hearts. They were already peak-stage god kings, but they could not find the opportunity to break through to the god emperor realm. If this continued, they did not know when they would be able to break through. Perhaps they would never be able to reach the God Emperor realm in this lifetime. As for Ji Tianxing, they did not know how many hardships he would have to go through to reach the God Emperor realm. They only wanted to break through to the God Emperor realm as soon as possible so that they could help Ji Tianxing and work together with him to overcome the hardships. Other than Bai Feng, Chao Qingyu and Yang, the rest were all lesser and intermediate god kings. On this boundless source star, their little bit of combat power was even more useless. They were also filled with energy. They only wanted to improve their strength again. After everyone went into seclusion to cultivate, Ji Tianxing went to the Sea of Nirvana flames again. The 9th level of the Divine Pagoda was as quiet as ever. The cold and arrogant Pan-Re-God Emperor was still sitting cross-legged in the array like before. She was focused on healing her injuries. The 5-colored light barrier within a radius of 10,000 feet continued to gather vast amounts of divine power and infuse it into her body. She was enveloped in a layer of dazzling light. She looked hazy and illusory, adding a sense of mystery. However, Ji Tianxing scanned her with his divine sense and knew that her injuries were recovering very slowly. In just 1 or 2 months of recuperation there was almost no progress. It could not be helped. The flow of time in the Sea of Nirvana flames was normal. It was not like the distorted space-time. Even if the Sea of Nirvana flames was abundant, and the Pan-Re-God Emperor had countless cultivation resources and divine pills, it would still take a long time to heal. After looking at the Pan-Re-God Emperor, Ji Tianxing looked at God King Xianxia, who was not far away. Poor God King Xianxia. He was still a god core floating in the array, silently healing his injuries. As for reforming his body, he didn't know when it would be completed. Even if God King Crimson Afterglow reformed his divine body and recovered his strength as a peak God King, he would not be of much help to Ji Tianxing. The main thing was Pan-Re God Emperor. If she could heal her injuries as soon as possible and regain her peak fighting strength, she would be Ji Tianxing's greatest support. Ji Tianxing had thought long and hard before coming to see the Prajna God Emperor. He stepped through the Sea of Nirvanic flames, passed through the defensive formation, and arrived in front of the Prajna God Emperor. Although he did not open his mouth to speak, he stood there for 10 breaths of time without leaving. Bo-Re God Emperor knew he had something to say, thereupon he stopped circulating his internal energy to treat his injury. "What's up?" The Prajna God Emperor opened his eyes and looked forward expressionlessly. His eyes were unfocused and he didn't want to look at Ji Tianxing. Even her tone was as cold as usual. However, Ji Tianxing knew very well that he only needed to say a few words to make the Prajna God Emperor break through her pretense. "You're healing here, but the progress is too slow." The Prajna God Emperor maintained her expressionless posture and said coldly, "This emperor's injuries are very serious, but I can still recover in 200 years. 200 years? That's too long." Ji Tianxing frowned and said in a low voice, "I'll take you to a place where you can get twice the results with half the effort." No. The Prajna God Emperor refused flatly. She had already guessed that Ji Tianxing wouldn't come looking for her for anything good. Ji Tianxing naturally wouldn't give up so easily. He continued to persuade, "Don't you want to recover your peak strength as soon as possible?" "I don't." The Prajna God Emperor said without hesitation, "I just want to stay here and recover in peace for 200 years. It'll be a long time of peace and quiet." Ji Tianxing frowned again and continued to persuade, "You need 200 years to recover, and Scarlet Afterglow might need even longer. Don't tell me you two master and disciple are going to stay here and recover in peace and quiet? I'll take you to a place where you can save 50 times the time. Moreover, only my closest and most trusted friends and family can enter that place." Hearing these words, the Prajna God Emperor finally fell silent for a moment, as if she was weighing the pros and cons. Of course, the main point of her consideration wasn't to save 50 times the time, but rather, only Ji Tianxing's closest and most trusted people could enter that place. After muttering to herself for a while, she asked expressionlessly, "Your trusted aides and your wife and children are all there?" Ji Tianxing nodded, guessing that she might be moved. The Prajna God Emperor finally raised her head, shooting him a cold glance and asking with a sneer, "Aren't you afraid that I'll kill your wife and children when you're not paying attention?" Ji Tianxing's expression was serious, his voice low as he said, "Firstly, you're not the type to willfully slaughter the innocent, disregard human life. Secondly, since I dared to invite you over, I have absolute confidence that I can stop all of this from happening before you make your move." After pausing for a moment, he added another sentence. "Moreover, you should be well aware of my nature. My wife and friends are my bottom line. If anyone dares to touch my bottom line, I will make sure they die without a burial place. The Prajna God Emperor's expression didn't change in the slightest, but her heart was filled with a bit of bitterness and hatred. She didn't answer whether she would go or not, but instead asked, "You're in such a hurry to help me recover my strength, so you must have run into some trouble and want me to risk my life for you, right?" Ji Tianxing spread out his hands. "We've already formed an alliance and are working together. If I run into any danger or trouble, of course you'll fight alongside me. What's wrong with that?" The Prajna God Emperor coldly glared at him, sneering, "Only a shameless bastard like you can make using others sound so fresh and refined." Ji Tianxing ignored her, minding his own business as he waved his hand and cast a spell, removing the Prajna God Emperor and Crimson Dawn's array. "If you don't say anything, I'll take it that you agree. As her master, even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for Crimson Dawn." As he spoke, he had already removed the two arrays enveloping the Prajna God Emperor and Crimson Dawn, and with a wave of his hand summoned Crimson Dawn's godhead. The Prajna God Emperor glared at him again, muttering in a low voice, "Shameless." Ji Tianxing ignored her words, turned around and left with Crimson Dawn's godhead. The Prajna God Emperor was helpless. She could only frown and follow him with a cold expression. Moments later, the two entered the distorted spacetime, flying into the depths of spacetime. When they arrived at the foot of the Crimson Flame Sacred Tree, the Prajna God Emperor saw many floating platforms, arranged in an orderly manner. On these wide platforms, there were various races of different appearances, gathered in groups of 3 to 5, all focused on cultivating. All of them had the strength of a deity king. Only 2 of the most beautiful women had reached the peak of the deity king realm. The Prajna God Emperor's gaze swept around, finally landing on the 2 women, carefully sizing them up. Even if Ji Tianxing didn't open his mouth to introduce them, she could intuitively guess that these 2 beautiful women were his wives. Chapter 45-34. The Prajna God Emperor recognized the woman in the red dress at a glance. It was Mingyu from back then. When the Prajna God Emperor was in the God realm, she was known as the #1 goddess of the God realm. One could only imagine how admirable her peerless beauty and her unparalleled temperament were in the past. It was also because she was too dazzling and was known as the #1 beauty of the God realm that she could not understand why Kenshin would reject her. She had also thought that Kenshin rejected her because of Mingyu. Even if Kenshin was cold and aloof and never married, he still protected Mingyu in his heart and did not want her to be sad. Therefore, Kenshin was reborn in this life and would definitely think of all ways to let Mingyu be reborn as well. After both of them were reborn, Kenshin marrying Mingyu as his wife was also a matter of course. The Prajna God Emperor could understand and would not bear a grudge against Kenshin and Mingyu. However, beside Mingyu was a woman in a white dress with an elegant and noble temperament. She was as pure as the bright moon of the 9th heaven. She had both a peerless beauty and an unparalleled temperament. She was gentle, kind, virtuous, dignified, noble and holy all in one. The Prajna God Emperor's first reaction was that she was not only Long Tian's wife but also gave birth to 2 children for Long Tian. This was because she saw Wuhan and Wushuang not far behind Yunyao. Those 2 talented young man and young woman looked very similar to Yunyao and their temperaments were also somewhat similar. The Prajna God Emperor stared at Yunyao, Jiku, Ji Wuhan and Ji Wushuang. After sizing them up for a while, she turned to look at Ji Tianxing. Huh. She did not say anything and only laughed coldly. Her cold eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. Of course, there was also a faint trace of hatred hidden in the depths of her eyes. No matter how deep her disguise was in these 1,000 years, she still could not completely let go of the matter of the past. As for the contempt and disdain in her eyes, Ji Tianxing was well aware of the reason. The gist of it was that back then, you were obsessed with the way of the sword and didn't get close to women. Not only did you reject me, you even harmed Mingyue. But now your temperament has changed greatly. Not only did you marry a wife, you even married 2. Shameless bastard, is this your true nature? Were you pretending all those years ago? Ji Tianxing guessed what the Prajna God Emperor was thinking, but he couldn't explain it, so he simply ignored her and pretended not to see. He led the Prajna God Emperor to the north of the Crimson Flame Sacred Tree, landing on an empty platform. In the future, you and Xianxia can stay here to heal your injuries. The flow of time here was 50 times faster than the outside world. As for cultivation resources and healing pills, you already have them, so you don't need me to care about them, right? Stingy, stingy. The Prajna God Emperor frowned and glared at Ji Tianxing before sitting down with a cold face. She quickly cast a spell and formed two small divine formations to cover the platform, helping her and Xianxia to heal their injuries. At the same time, the divine formations also had the effect of blocking divine sense and concealing them. She and Xianxia stayed in the divine formations so no one outside could see them. Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect her to act like this, as if out of sight, out of mind. The Prajna God Emperor glared at him coldly again and asked, "Why aren't you leaving? What are you waiting for?" Seeing her so angry, Ji Tianxing knew that she wouldn't calm down in a short time, so he turned and left. As soon as he left, the Prajna God Emperor activated the two divine formations, isolating the platform from the outside world, protecting and concealing herself and Xianxia. Then the Prajna God Emperor sat on the platform, still angry, for a long time before her emotions gradually calmed down. After settling everyone, Ji Tianxing left the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and returned to his room. He didn't need to think too much about helping the beast race and imparting skills to the ferocious beasts and divine beast. He already had the corresponding plans and preparations in his heart. He first took out 2 specially made jade slips and chose 10 divine powers and mystic techniques, recording them in the jade slips. These 10 divine powers and mystic techniques were all at the God Emperor's level, or rather skills. They were all for setting up arrays, refining pills and refining weapons. Lai Tian and Yan Li had already shown sufficient sincerity, so he naturally had to express his sincerity to reassure them. These 10 divine powers and skills were specially for Lai Tian and Yan Li. For nearly 1,000 years, the two of them had captured countless desolate race god kings and learned thousands of alchemy, refining weapons and setting up arrays. However, those were all at the god king level. Even if they were mastered, they wouldn't be of much use, much less be able to comprehend them on their own and raise them to the God Emperor level. As for the 10 God Emperor level skills that Ji Tianxing chose, although they were relatively simple and entry-level skills, they were most suitable for Lai Tian and Yan Li to cultivate. They were definitely what they wanted the most. After recording the 10 Emperor level skills, Ji Tianxing kept the 2 specially made jade slips. Following that, he chose another 300 God King level skills and recorded them in 3 separate jade slips. In these 3 jade slips, there were 100 ways to set up arrays, 100 ways to refine pills, and 100 ways to refine weapons. For a long period of time in the future, Ji Tianxing would choose skills from these 300 skills when he imparted them to the God King realm beast race. This was because the 300 skills he chose were relatively basic and important skills. Not only could it ensure that the God King realm beast race could learn them quickly, it could also help them build a good foundation, allowing them to refine pills, refine weapons, and set up arrays more efficiently. Of course, among these 3 skills, the way to set up arrays was the most important. It was also a necessary technique for refining pills and weapons. If one couldn't set up a suitable array, it would be a fool's dream to refine pills and weapons successfully. 4 hours later, Ji Tianxing finished recording the 300 skills and kept the 3 jade slips. He summoned the mystic cloud bird, who was in charge of sending messages, and got it to inform Lai Tian to meet him in the divine palace. This was the first time the mystic cloud bird had received an order from Ji Tianxing, so it was naturally overjoyed. After it respectfully acknowledged the order, it left as fast as lightning. Lai Tian had been waiting for Ji Tianxing's news, afraid that time would be wasted. When he saw the mystic cloud bird's message, he immediately put down whatever he was doing and rushed to the divine palace as fast as he could. Both parties met in the study. The moment they met, Lai Tian couldn't wait to ask, "Long Tian, have you thought of a plan? Or do you have any needs? If you have any difficulties, just tell me directly. I will send my subordinates to solve them immediately." Ji Tianxing raised his hand to signal him to calm down. He said, "Neither too fast nor too slow. You and Yan Li must be in charge of the overall situation, so you two don't have to come here to study every day. I have chosen 10 Emperor-level skills that are most suitable for you two to cultivate. Take them and study them carefully. If there is anything you don't understand, come and ask me for advice." Then he took out 2 specially made jade slips and handed them to Lai Tian. Lai Tian's eyes lit up. He received the jade slips with joy, as if he had received a precious treasure. Chapter 45-35. After 1,000 years, Lai Tian and Yan Li had finally obtained the emperor-level skills that they had dreamed of. At this moment, Lai Tian was so excited that his body trembled, and he almost shed tears of gratitude. Ordinary people couldn't imagine how much he had yearned to obtain the God-Emperor-level alchemy, weapon forging and array formation techniques for the past 1,000 years. He had even thought more than once about taking the risk and personally going to the territories of the two great temples to obtain the secret techniques by hook or by crook. But in the end, reason prevailed over impulse and he had to extinguish this thought. Now he had finally obtained the treasure that he had dreamed of, and it was 10 different skills at once. He and Yan Li would soon learn these skills, set up Emperor-level divine arrays, and refine Emperor-level divine pills and divine weapons. From now on, he and Yan Li would have more means and methods to increase their combat power. When the beast race was invaded and bullied by the two great temples, they would be able to launch a more powerful counterattack and better protect their people. For the entire beast race, this was a huge change and incomparable improvement. How could Lai Tian not be excited? Ji Tianxing saw that he was so excited and reminded him, "Don't be happy too early, those 10 skills are the simplest and most basic. But your foundation is weak and you may not be able to learn them quickly. According to my estimation, you will need about 2 years to master all 10 skills and be able to successfully refine pills, forge weapons and set up arrays." Ji Tianxing thought that by reminding Lai Tian he would be able to calm him down. Unexpectedly, Lai Tian became even more excited after hearing this. His blood flow sped up and his heartbeat doubled. What? We can learn it in 2 years? After we learn it, we can set up Emperor-level arrays and refine Emperor-level divine pills and divine weapons? Is this true? Heavens, this is unbelievable. Lai Tian's eyes shone brightly as he exclaimed excitedly. Ji Tianxing was helpless and decided not to say anything more. There was no other way. Their knowledge was not on the same level, and it was difficult for him to understand Lai Tian's feelings. To him, if he took half a year to learn the 10 simplest and most basic Emperor-level skills, he would already feel that it was very slow. As for Lai Tian and Yan Li, they had wasted 1,000 years, but they hadn't been able to learn anything. How could they not be excited when they suddenly found out that with the help of Ji Tianxing, they would be able to master it in 2 years? A moment later, when Lai Skysplit's emotions calmed down, Ji Tianxing continued, "From tomorrow onwards, I will build a square outside the gate of the Celestial Palace to teach and preach. The plaza would not be too big. It could accommodate 1,000 or 2,000 people at most." In order to not cause chaos and prevent others from listening to the lecture, he tried his best to let the beasts who could transform into human form listen. The 18 lords and the geniuses under their command could come and learn at any time. Every day I will explain different Taoist techniques and skills. Today it might be the art of setting up arrays, tomorrow it might be the art of refining pills, and the day after tomorrow it might be the art of refining weapons. Sky Splitter listened attentively. When it finished listening to Ji Tianxing's arrangements, it hurriedly nodded in agreement. "That's good. As long as the people of my clan can understand the Tao that you speak of, they will gain something. As for how much they could learn and how much they could improve, it all depended on their own talent and luck. But in this way I will have to trouble you." Sky Splitter thought to himself. Ji Tianxing had to teach and preach every day. After 3 consecutive years he would definitely be exhausted, right? Who knew? Ji Tianxing waved his hand and chuckled. "What are you thinking about? Do you think I will preach for 3 consecutive years? At most, in the first year I will preach frequently. In the last 2 years they will have laid the foundation. Then they will have to improve through practice. When that time comes, I may only need to give them some pointers." "All right." Sky Splitter was slightly disappointed. The light in its eyes dimmed. It said solemnly, "No matter what, I will arrange for guards to maintain order. I will not let you be disturbed or affected." Ji Tianxing wanted to tell it that it was worrying too much. When he preached, there would be no need for the guards to maintain order. All the listeners would be very obedient and quiet. But before it happened, he did not want to say anything. Soon the night had passed. Under Sky Splitter's instructions, news of Ji Tianxing's public preaching and teaching outside the Divine Palace quickly spread throughout the capital. In just one night, tens of thousands of beasts and divine beasts knew about this. This was the first time these beasts had heard of such a thing. To think that a powerful God Emperor would be so generous as to be willing to teach and guide everyone in their cultivation. This was simply unheard of, something that had never been seen before. While the beasts were shocked, they were also very curious and expectant. They were all discussing spiritedly, filled with curiosity towards the mysterious god emperor of the Flood tribe. They all decided to take a look at his true appearance. Countless beasts were guessing whether the god emperor of the Flood tribe was really preaching or just going through the motions to fool everyone. If it was the former, then he was the benefactor of the beast. He deserved the respect and gratitude of all beasts. If it was the latter, then the beasts would definitely ask the two ancestors to severely punish him. However, just as the beasts were rubbing their palms in anticipation and preparing to head outside the divine palace to listen to the preaching, they received another piece of news. Patriarch Skysplitter announced that due to the large number of people, the square outside the divine palace could not accommodate too many beasts. Hence, only beasts that could take human form could head there. The moment this news was released, 90% of the beasts lost the opportunity to observe and learn. Instead, the beasts that could take human form were extremely happy and proud. After a few hours of torturous waiting, at daybreak, more than 4,000 divine beasts and beasts rushed to the divine palace where Ji Tianxing resided. In order to prevent congestion, the 4,000 beasts had already completed their human forms in the sky before they arrived at the square outside the divine palace. Although they did not look like humans or the desolate race in their humanoid form, they looked more like so-called beastmen. However, there was one thing. Their bodies had shrunk significantly. Even so, when the 4,000 beasts arrived at the divine palace square, they realized that the square was indeed not big enough to accommodate so many beasts. The square, with a radius of 10,000 feet, was personally built by Ji Tianxing. It was extremely gorgeous and majestic. The entire square was situated in a sea of clouds. The ground was paved with nebula rock and there were billions of runic patterns. They looked very profound. In the middle of the square was a 100 feet tall platform. It was where Ji Tianxing sat. The beastmen who had arrived at the plaza first all gathered around the platform before finding a place to sit down. After accommodating 2,000 beasts, the square was filled to the brim. The remaining 2,000 plus beasts could only leave in disappointment and regret under Skysplitter's orders. Chapter 45-36. When the sun rose, Ji Tianxing appeared under the anticipation of many beasts. He walked straight to the high platform in the middle of the square and sat cross-legged on it. His dignified gaze swept across the surroundings. The 2,000 beasts around him were very curious about him. Now that they finally saw him in person, they were naturally filled with joy. Under the lead of a few lords and generals, the 2,000 beasts all stood up and bowed to Ji Tianxing to express their greatest welcome and respect. Seeing that the beasts were very respectful and had a certain foundation in etiquette and education, Ji Tianxing was secretly gratified. Therefore, he didn't waste his time teaching those beastmen about etiquette and shame. He began to talk about the origin of Tao. He started with the origin of all things and explained the origin of Tao to the 2,000 beasts, as well as the origin of the universe in heaven and earth. The ancestor-level powerhouses of the beasts, such as Lai Tian and Yan Li, would naturally study the origin of Tao and understand these principles. However, these principles would not be spread among the beasts. Only an extremely small number of beasts knew about them. Now, Ji Tianxing was using simple and easy-to-understand language to describe the supreme Tao of heaven and earth. Instantly, the beasts were enlightened and benefited immensely. Of course, this was only a prelude. When the 2,000 beasts were completely attracted and their attention was completely immersed in his lecture, he gradually changed the topic and transitioned to Tao cultivation. The content of his lecture today was more broad and was not limited to one type of skill. Whether it was battle techniques, the experience of using the laws, the understanding of Tao, or the techniques of using divine powers, he touched on all of them. The 2,000 beasts had never received such guidance and teaching before. They felt that it was new and interesting, and they had indeed broadened their horizons and understood many principles. Therefore, the guards that Lai Tian had arranged in advance were not of any use and there was no need to maintain any order. The 2,000 beasts all sat on the square obediently and listened attentively. None of them dared to disturb or be absent-minded. Even the guards gradually became engrossed in the story. Time passed quietly. The sky turned from bright to dark until the night arrived. Ji Tianxing taught the Tao for a whole day, allowing the 2,000 beasts to understand many things. They had countless insights and they also learned many skills and experiences. As for what the beasts learned and what they learned, it varied from person to person. However, all the beasts were very happy and satisfied. They were very grateful for Ji Tianqing's teachings and teachings. Even though the sky had darkened, they were completely oblivious. They were still listening with great interest and were unwilling to leave. It was only when Ji Tianqing announced that the lecture had ended and was about to leave that the 2,000 beasts came to their senses and instantly panicked. They all stood up and bowed to express their gratitude. They begged Ji Tianqing to continue. Many beasts shouted and begged Ji Tianqing to continue. But the beasts and 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 beasts. The 2,000 beasts were all deeply regretful. They all showed expressions of regret and reluctance as they stayed on the plaza, unwilling to leave. At this moment, Sky Splitter appeared in the sky above the square once more and said in a dignified tone, "Today's sermon is over. You can do as you please. Regardless of whether you stay here and wait for tomorrow's lecture to begin or return to your residences to rest, you are not allowed to disturb Long Tian God Emperor. I invited him here to teach you so that you can understand what the Divine Tao is, why and how to cultivate the Divine Tao. If you only know how to listen but do not know how to think, analyze and apply it, then you will have listened in vain. You will have failed to live up to my efforts." As the saying goes, a single sentence enlightens the dreamer. After hearing Lai Tian's words, the 2,000 beasts immediately understood the crux of the matter. They were all ashamed. It was true that Long Tian God Emperor's lecture today was not only interesting and captivating, but it also contained many profound principles and principles. They only felt that it was interesting, but they did not calm down and ponder carefully. Naturally, they were unable to learn more and it was difficult for them to improve. The reason why Long Tian God Emperor did not continue his lecture was to give everyone a night to think about it. Otherwise, it would be a waste of time and effort no matter how many principles he spoke of. After understanding this principle, the 2,000 beasts bowed and acknowledged Lai Tian's order. After that, more than half of the beast god kings left the plaza and returned to their residences to carefully ponder and comprehend. If they could remember half of what Ji Tianqing had taught them today and comprehend some of the profound principles, it would be enough for them to improve by leaps and bounds. Within an hour, more than 1,400 beasts had left one after another. However, there were still more than 500 beasts who chose to stay. They did not make a ruckus and remained in the plaza in silence. All of them looked as if they were deep in thought or contemplation. It was clear that these beast god kings were all earnestly trying to comprehend what Ji Tianqing had taught them. Thanks to Ji Tianqing's simple yet thought-provoking lecture, these beast god kings were able to quickly enter a state of mind once they began to ponder. They would completely forget about everything around them and immerse themselves in their own mental world. Talented and intelligent individuals would be able to rise to the challenge and quickly comprehend one problem after another. They would be able to solve all kinds of puzzles and finally comprehend the truth. Meanwhile, the more mediocre beast god kings would be able to learn to ponder and reflect on themselves even if they were unable to quickly comprehend any principles. Once they had accumulated enough knowledge and comprehension, they would also be able to comprehend and achieve breakthroughs one day. In short, these 500 beast god kings had all benefited from their contemplation and comprehension. Their decision to stay in the plaza also indicated that they were waiting for tomorrow's lecture. Perhaps they would be able to comprehend all the questions and puzzles that they could not comprehend tonight after listening to Ji Tianqing's lecture the next day. Meanwhile, news of Ji Tianqing's lecture began to spread throughout the Li city. During this entire day, tens of thousands of beasts who were unable to listen to the lecture waited anxiously for the results. They could not approach the plaza, so they naturally did not know what was going on today. Now the lecture that had lasted for a day had ended. More than 1,000 beasts who had listened to the lecture brought back all kinds of news. Many of the beast god kings said that they had never learned so much knowledge and principles in their entire lives. There were also many beast god kings who said that Long Tian God Emperor was the most knowledgeable and holy being they had ever seen in their lives. Today, when Long Tian God Emperor was lecturing, they felt as if they had seen the embodiment of heaven and earth. There were also some beast god kings who were extremely reverent of Long Tian God Emperor and repeatedly vowed to break through as soon as possible so that they would not disappoint Long Tian God Emperor. All kinds of words and news spread throughout the Li city and reached the ears of tens of thousands of beasts. As such, the tens of thousands of beasts became even more curious and reverent toward Ji Tianqing. Chapter 45-37. News of Ji Tianqing's Tao teaching on the first day caused a huge stir in the Li city. Apart from the desolate tribe god kings who were slaves, no one dared to discuss the matter. Tens of thousands of beasts were discussing the matter with great respect and reverence for Ji Tianqing. They were also filled with curiosity and anticipation. On the first day, only 2,000 beasts listened to Ji Tianqing's Tao teaching. The other 2,000 beasts were able to transform, but they were too late. As such, the 2,000 beasts hurried to Ji Tianqing's divine palace before the sun had even risen. However, when they arrived at the plaza outside the divine palace, they discovered that over 500 beasts had already arrived. Not only had these beasts arrived first, they had already found a place to sit down and were in a state of deep contemplation. Some of them were even enveloped in a layer of divine light, and their auras were violently fluctuating, as if they were about to make a breakthrough at any moment. Upon seeing this, all the god kings were enlightened. Those 500 beasts hadn't arrived early. Instead, they had been listening the entire day and hadn't left. From the looks of it, they had all benefited greatly and planned to continue listening today. With this in mind, many of the god kings were a little envious. They only regretted that they had arrived late yesterday and missed out on a day of listening. As such, these god kings all came to their senses and hurriedly fought for a spot. It was fine if they missed it yesterday, but they couldn't miss it again today. As a result, in a short 30 minutes, the plaza was filled again. Apart from the 500 beasts that had stayed last night, only about 1,400 of the 2,000 beasts that had arrived today managed to grab a spot. The 500 or so god kings that had arrived late were the most unlucky and tragic ones. They had missed the first day and now they were going to miss the second day. These 500 or so beasts were filled with grief and resentment. It was too late for regrets. They left the plaza with dejected expressions, but they all swore in their hearts that they had already missed 2 days, so they definitely couldn't miss out on tomorrow. Tomorrow morning. No, tonight they would come early to fight for a spot. Not long after, the sun rose and the sky gradually brightened. A new day had arrived and the gates of the divine palace opened. A white-robed Ji Tianqing bathed in golden light stepped out of the divine palace and onto the plaza. With yesterday's experience in mind, the 2,000 beasts listening to the sermon on the plaza were more well-behaved and well-behaved. When Ji Tianqing stepped onto the high platform in the middle of the square, the 2,000 beasts bowed in unison and greeted him respectfully. Although many of the beasts were new to etiquette, their actions were still a little out of place. However, Ji Tianqing believed that as long as these beasts were willing to learn, they would be able to do so in no time. In addition, Skyrending and Yanli claimed that they wanted to learn the skills and habits of the desolate race. However, many of the things that Ji Tianqing taught had his imprints and characteristics, especially his way of thinking, beliefs and reasoning. They were different from the desolate race's culture and beliefs. On the other hand, these beasts were like a blank piece of paper. They would learn whatever was taught and they wouldn't be able to differentiate between the two. Forget about these beast race god kings. Even Loathing and Skysplitter might not be able to distinguish clearly. So what if they knew the truth? Actually, they did not need to learn things from the desolate race, but they needed to learn things that could make them stronger. Not long after, the second day's Tao teaching began. Compared to the first day, Ji Tianqing began to reduce the number of explanations and thoughts regarding the great Tao of heaven and earth. Instead, he taught them some divine powers and techniques in an orderly manner. Not only did he talk about the experiences and techniques of cultivating the divine Tao, he also talked about alchemy, weapon refinement and array formation. Of the 500+ beasts that had heard the Tao yesterday, many of them were enlightened when they heard these things again. They were immediately enlightened. What was even more exaggerated was that 6 beast race godly monarchs were glowing the previous night, on the brink of a breakthrough. Today, during Ji Tianqing's Tao teaching, the 6 beast race godly monarchs gained an epiphany on the spot and broke through one after another. This was under the noses of 2,000 beasts. It was obvious how much shock it brought to the other beasts when they broke through on the spot. At that moment, all the beasts were excited. Their blood boiled as they cheered for their companions in their hearts. However, due to Ji Tianqing's Tao teaching, they could not disrupt the order, so they remained silent. However, in their hearts they had already deeply acknowledged Ji Tianqing. The epiphany and breakthroughs of their companions were the best proof of this. Today their 6 companions were able to break through on the spot. Perhaps they would be the ones breaking through tomorrow. Without a doubt, not only was the Tao teaching on the second day a complete success, it had also achieved a stunning effect. As night fell, Ji Tianxing announced the end of his Tao teaching and returned to the divine palace without looking back. No one knew that he was not resting in the divine palace at night, nor was he preparing for his Tao teaching the next day. Instead, he was cultivating in the distorted space. This time, the beast race godly monarchs were still filled with regret and reluctance. However, they did not shout or bow to Ji Tianxing like they had the day before. They did not request for him to continue his Tao teaching. This was because they already knew the rules of the Long Tian God Emperor, so they all tacitly followed them. After bowing respectfully, many of the beast race godly monarchs left the plaza and returned to their residences to cultivate in seclusion. After listening to Ji Tianxing's Tao teaching, they had learned far too many things and needed some time to digest them. There were also a few hundred beast race godly monarchs who followed their companions' example and stayed in the plaza. They all sat quietly in their original spots, earnestly comprehending and analyzing the things that Ji Tianxing taught them, absorbing nutrients from them. Of course, they would continue to listen tomorrow even though they were comprehending the Tao here tonight. 2 hours later, the plaza quieted down. Almost no one was walking around anymore. There were more than 600 beast race godly monarchs who stayed behind. At this moment, another 500 beast race godly monarchs hurriedly rushed over and snatched their spots without saying anything. They were the unluckiest ones who had missed 2 Tao teaching sessions in a row. Although they did not hear anything and sat in the plaza in a daze, there was nothing for them to comprehend. However, this did not stop them from anticipating and fantasizing about tomorrow's Tao teaching session. Not far from Ji Tianxing's divine palace was the divine palace where Lai Tian and Yan Li resided. After receiving the jade slips from Ji Tianxing, the two of them focused on studying and learning every day. They only wanted to learn the 10 emperor-level techniques as soon as possible. However, during these 2 days, they would secretly observe Ji Tianxing when he started and ended his lectures. The changes in the people in the plaza tonight made Lai Tian discover a problem. Although there are more people fighting for seats in advance tonight, haven't you noticed a problem? None of the people who listened for 2 days in a row were left. Yan Li was stunned for a moment before probing. What you mean is that the things that the Long Tian God Emperor taught are very profound and contain too many principles. No matter how talented the people are, they can only listen to it for 2 days at most before they reach their limit. Chapter 45-38. Both Lai Tian and Yan Li knew this very well. Currently, the 4,000 shape-shifting beasts in Li City were all at the Divine King realm. Moreover, their comprehension and aptitude were very high. With their talents, it was reasonable to say that they should be able to understand at least 80 to 90% of the techniques taught by God Emperor Long Tian. They would need to listen for at least 3 to 5 days before encountering a bottleneck and unresolvable doubts. They would need to go back into seclusion to meditate. Now that such a situation had occurred, it could only mean that the techniques taught by God Emperor Long Tian were too profound and exquisite. Understanding this, Lai Tian and Yan Li were happy instead of worried. Previously, I was worried that even if we forced him to teach us techniques, he would just brush it off and get away with it. Now it seems that we worried too much. Yes. The 10 techniques he gave us are enough for us to study and cultivate for many years. Even when he taught us in public, he was talking about practical experiences and techniques. Only now do I believe that he really wants to help us and doesn't look down on us. Alright, we don't need to discuss this anymore. Tell the other lords that we should also go into seclusion for a period of time. After a few words of discussion, Lai Tian and Yan Li went their separate ways. Yan Li returned to seclusion in a secret room to comprehend a few emperor-level techniques. Lai Tian found a few lords and trusted subordinates. After giving them some instructions, he entered seclusion in a secret room. In the following half a month, Li City became very lively. Every day, Ji Tianxing would spend the entire day in the plaza outside the divine palace. He would teach the beast race's god kings cultivation methods and experience, enlightening them and giving them pointers. Every day there were 2,000 beast race god kings listening to his teachings. They filled the plaza until not even a drop of water could trickle through. Every beast race god king was very respectful of him. They listened attentively. After nightfall, Ji Tianxing would return to the divine palace to cultivate. The beastmen of Li City all knew of his habits and quickly adapted to it. Every night, several hundred beast race god kings would stay in the plaza to meditate and comprehend or to discuss with each other. After a few days, the small square outside the divine palace became the Taoist field of Li City, the holy land in the hearts of many beasts. Not only could they listen to the Supreme Great Tao here and receive guidance from the Supreme God Emperor, but they could also discuss and verify with each other. There was no other way to make them grow faster than this. Even if it was a master teaching his disciple, it wouldn't be much better. Although the only ones who came to listen to the preaching were the 4,000 beasts who could take human form. But after a few days, the various lords brought their elite geniuses back to Li City in a hurry. Every day, several hundred beast race god kings would reach their limits after listening for 2 days straight and return to their residences to cultivate in seclusion. However, there were new beast god kings joining the ranks every day, so the plaza was always filled to the brim with 2,000 people every day. What was even more miraculous was that almost every day, there would be a few beast race god kings who would attain enlightenment on the spot and directly break through to the next cultivation level. Li Du originally had more than 40,000 divine beasts and ferocious beasts. They possessed decent strength, but they had never transformed. When they heard the news of Ji Tianxing's preaching and personally witnessed the astonishing changes and growth of their companions, they all desperately tried to transform. Once they successfully transformed, they immediately rushed to the plaza where Ji Tianxing was preaching just to listen to Ji Tianxing's preaching. This also caused the transformation technique that Sky Splitter and Loathe Inferno had been promoting for many years to suddenly explode. In the past, most beasts were not interested in the transformation technique. They felt that it was easier and more convenient to move around with their original bodies. Why would they need to transform? But now, without anyone's persuasion, all the beasts were fighting to cultivate the transformation technique. Unknowingly, half a month passed. The 18 lords had all arrived, and they brought with them more than 10,000 talented beast race god kings. In addition to the original 4,000 beast race god kings in Li City and the recently transformed 2,000 beasts, Ji Tianxing's disciples had reached a total of 16,000. Moreover, as time passed, his disciples would only increase. Normally, the 18 lords, Sky Splitter and Loathe Inferno's trusted subordinates were revered and above all the other beasts. However, when Ji Tianxing imparted knowledge to them, they listened and learned respectfully just like the other beasts. Many attentive beasts discovered that Sky Splitter and Loathe Inferno had not appeared for many days. After asking around, they found out that the two ancestors had obtained an emperor-level mystic art from the Dragon Sky God Emperor and were currently in seclusion to study it. When the beasts heard that even their two ancestors were cultivating the Dragon Sky God Emperor's ultimate technique, it was definitely the fortune of 3 lifetimes for them to be able to receive the guidance and teachings of the Dragon Sky God Emperor. As a result, Ji Tianxing's status in the hearts of the beasts rose at an immeasurable speed. In just half a month, his prestige in Li City was second only to Sky Splitter and Loathe Inferno. Late at night on the 16th day, there was a workshop south of Li City. It was a place where the beasts smelted ores and refined divine weapons. Over the past 1,000 years, batches of desolate race godly monarchs had been used as slaves to refine divine weapons day and night. The beasts who guarded this place all year round gradually learned many godly monarch-level refining techniques and became the beasts' craftsmen. The armor and weapons worn by the beasts now came from this workshop. They were refined by the beasts' craftsmen and the desolate race's godly monarchs. At this moment, a desolate race man in ragged clothes with disheveled hair was being escorted by 4 beasts' godly monarchs. He was flying south from the workshop. The desolate race man with a haggard face was also a middle-level godly monarch. 100 years ago he had ventured into the unknown lands to search for treasures. He had killed many divine beasts and ferocious beasts and plundered many resources and treasures. However, after the beasts captured him, they did not execute him under the orders of Sky Splitter and Loathe Inferno. Instead, they brought him back to Li City as a slave. As this person was skilled in refining divine weapons, he had been refining divine weapons in the workshop for the past 100 years. Now that the 100 years were up, the beast's workshop owner, who was in charge of the workshop, gave the order to send this person away. The 4 beasts' godly monarchs escorted the desolate race man and flew south for an entire night. They only stopped at dawn. The group stopped in the sky above a dense forest. Two beasts' godly monarchs worked together to cast a spell to remove the seals and restrictions on the desolate race man. Ding Lang, the 100 years are up. On account of your honesty and hard work over the past few years, the workshop owner has released you as agreed. I hope you know your place and leave our race's territory as soon as possible. Do not stay here any longer. From today onwards, if you dare step into our race's territory again and get caught, it will not be just a matter of 100 years of imprisonment. One of the beast's godly monarchs patted the desolate race man on the shoulder. After exhorting him, he allowed him to leave. Chapter 45-39. The desolate race man named Ding Lang looked extremely wretched and weathered. He was no different from a beggar. Furthermore, he was empty-handed. Not only did he not have a single divine artifact on him, he did not even have an interspatial ring. Although the seal had finally been removed, he did not dare to reveal his true form. He continued to maintain his cowering and trembling appearance. After all, the four beast race godly monarchs were stronger than him. This was the beast race's territory, so he did not dare to act rashly. Thank you for escorting me. All these years I am indebted to you for taking care of me. I am eternally grateful. Ding Lang was all smiles as he nodded and bowed to express his gratitude. The four beast race godly monarchs did not wish to waste any time and could not be bothered with him. The leader of the beast race godly monarchs waved his hand, indicating for him to leave quickly. But Ding Lang revealed an awkward wry smile as he carefully asked, "Brothers, look. I'm about to leave. Can my interspatial ring?" To all gods, interspatial rings were one of the most important items. Most of their wealth and belongings were stored in them. And in Ding Lang's interspatial ring, not only did it contain his life savings, it also contained some secrets and heritage treasures. Back when he was captured and sent to the refinement workshop as a slave, all his divine artifacts were confiscated. His interspatial ring was no exception. Back then, the workshop owner even said that as long as he performed well for 100 years, he could return the interspatial ring to him when he left. Unexpectedly, the four beast race godly monarchs sneered contemptuously when they heard this. What interspatial ring? You're actually asking for it from me? Ding Lang, it's already very fortunate that you were able to escape unscathed. Why do you still want an interspatial ring? Cut the crap. Get lost. Clearly, 100 years ago, after Ding Lang's interspatial ring was confiscated, his belongings and treasures had been taken away by the beast race. Now that 100 years had passed, the beast race had long forgotten about this matter. How could they return the interspatial ring to him? Of course, this was common practice. Nearly every desolate race godly monarch that was captured and sent to the Li city as a slave would eventually leave naked. These desolate race godly monarchs were rather smart. They did not care about worldly possessions like divine artifacts or interspatial rings. As long as they could leave alive, it would be a blessing. Only a stubborn fellow like Ding Lang would have the guts to ask about the spatial ring. After being scolded by the four god kings and pushed by one of them, Ding Lang could only suppress his anger and leave in a submissive manner. Even after he had flown tens of thousands of miles away and disappeared into the horizon, he still had a fearful and cowardly look on his face. However, after he flew 100,000 miles away, the expression on his face and his aura began to change. As he sped through the sky, he roared furiously and cursed those beasts. These damned lowly beasts. You enslaved me for 100 years and took everything I had. This hatred is absolutely irreconcilable. In Ding Lang's mind, being captured by the lowly ant-like beast race and enslaved for 100 years was the most humiliating thing in his life. The beast race had taken away all of his belongings and wealth, which made him hate the beast race to the bone. Just thinking back to how he had bowed to the four godly monarchs of the beast race in order to ask for the interspatial ring, he felt so humiliated that he nearly exploded. He silently swore in his heart that in this life, no matter what method or means he used, he would definitely take revenge. However, revenge needed to be considered at length. What was urgent was for him to leave the unknown lands as soon as possible and return to the Kongming Temple. As long as he returned to his homeland, he could quickly recover. After making up his mind, Ding Lang quickly identified the direction and rushed towards the southwest. At the same time, southwest of the capital, about 10 million miles away, this was the hinterland of the unknown lands. It was the most dangerous and primitive region. It had been tens of thousands of years since the desolate race had set foot here. As far as the eye could see, there were towering mountain ranges in all directions. It was boundless. Between the countless mountain ranges and perilous peaks, there were all sorts of mists and dangers. Even the sky was not calm. At times, strong winds would blow and dark clouds would cover the sky. At other times, there would be colorful lights blotting out the sky as heaven-earth divine powers went berserk. Even the seemingly calm sky would often have cracks and loopholes. At this moment, there was a divine cruiser that maintained an invisible state. It was flying over the vast mountain range heading towards the east. This 20,000 feet long invisible divine cruiser was the flagship of the Kongming Temple's fifth Hall Lord. Other than him and a few trusted experts, there were also 1,000 elite guards on the divine cruiser. They were all godly monarch realm experts. Ever since the four Hall Lords received the order to pursue and kill Ji Tianxing a few months ago, they had been constantly on the move and had not rested for a single day. Back when they were in the Kongming Temple's territory, it was still all right. Even if the Hall Lords were in the west, they could use the teleportation array to quickly rush to the eastern border of the Kongming Temple. However, later on, the second Hall Lord personally tried to kill Ji Tianxing, but Ji Tianxing still managed to escape. Furthermore, both sides suffered heavy losses. In a fit of anger, the first Hall Lord did not punish the second Hall Lord. Instead, he ordered the four Hall Lords to charge into the unknown lands and search for Ji Tianxing's whereabouts. Even the first Hall Lord himself had to leave the Kongming mystic realm and personally lead the elite experts to pursue Ji Tianxing. The Hall Lords saw the first Hall Lord's determination and understood one thing. No matter what, the Kongming Temple would do everything in their power to capture the young primordial god emperor. However, having determination was one thing. Having a goal, a route, and whether or not they could capture the target was another. At this moment, the fifth Hall Lord was sitting cross-legged in the control room of the divine cruiser. He seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed, but in reality he was casting spells to search the surrounding 200,000 miles. The other trusted experts were focused on steering the divine cruiser, heading towards the east at a moderate speed. They did not want to travel quickly. Instead, they wanted to pass through the unknown lands at a uniform speed. They searched along the way and did not let go of any clues. Even though they had been doing the same thing for 2 months, they still did not find anything. However, they could not get bored nor could they give up. They had to persevere. This was because not only the fifth Hall Lord but the fourth Hall Lord, the third Hall Lord and the second Hall Lord also wanted to do the same. The four of them were separated by 1,000,000 miles. They flew side by side towards the east, searching along the way. This was the only way to reduce their oversights and find as many clues as possible. Everyone understood this principle, but they still felt tired. Sigh. As the fifth Hall Lord cast spells to search the surroundings, he could not help but sigh. He muttered, "If we keep searching like this, when will it end? The unknown lands are so big and that guy is very cautious and cunning. This is like looking for a needle in a haystack. The hope is slim." Chapter 45-40. The confidants of the fifth Hall Master also had the same idea, but they did not dare to show it. Since the fifth Hall Master had brought it up first, they had the courage to discuss it. "Hall Master, the unknown land is so vast that the Flood God Emperor can escape or change his route. It's too difficult to catch him if we search in a straight line. It's not just about the escape route. The Lord Hall Master only knew that the guy escaped to the east through the apocalypse. But who knows if he went through the unknown land to the Xianxia Temple's territory or if he's hiding in the unknown land. That makes sense. We all know that the unknown land is dangerous, but that guy may not know. What if he thinks that the unknown land is a good place to hide and finds a place to hide? Where should we find him?" The confidants were not optimistic about this operation and had no confidence in catching Ji Tianxing. The fifth Hall Master opened his eyes and glanced at the crowd. He sneered, "It's not as simple as you think. Aren't you underestimating the first Palace Master's methods and my foundation too much? Just 3 days ago, the Lord Hall Master received a heavenly revelation again through the apocalypse. That guy did not leave the unknown land. He's in the core area of the unknown land and has been there for some time." Suddenly hearing this top-secret news, his confidants were all excited and overjoyed. "Really? The Lord Hallmaster received a heavenly revelation again? Great. As long as we can determine the approximate location of the Flood God Emperor, our search area will be greatly reduced. The Lord Hallmaster is indeed the leader of the Divine Hall. He's the one closest to immortality. He's so powerful. It's just as we expected. That Flood God Emperor is really cunning. He's hiding in the core area of the unknown land and thinks that we can't find him. Fortunately, the Lord Hallmaster can get a heavenly revelation. Otherwise, we might have been fooled and passed through the unknown land. His confidants discussed excitedly. They were all full of confidence, as if they would soon be able to capture their target. Only the fifth palace master's face remained cold and uninterested. While everyone was excited, he mercilessly poured a bucket of cold water on them. Do you think that we can find him just because we can confirm that he's hiding in the core region of the unknown lands? Do you know how big the unknown lands are? How big was the core region? That guy's strength and methods were not weaker than the second palace master's. He was also good at concealing his whereabouts and aura. Even if we spend a few months searching the core area, can we really find him? Perhaps if we were to brush past him, we might not even be able to discover his existence even if we were only tens of thousands of miles away. Sure enough, the confidants who were still full of excitement immediately quieted down. The fifth palace master continued, "Don't forget that this is the core region of the unknown lands. It is also the most dangerous place. Most of the strongest vicious beasts and divine beasts were gathered here, as well as the rumored emperor-level vicious beasts. Those were ancient creatures. Not only do we have to search for that god emperor, but we also have to avoid alerting the emperor-level beast. Otherwise, we would have to fight with the vicious beasts before we even capture that god emperor." The confidants fell silent. They knew that they were being blindly optimistic and they all revealed looks of shame. The fifth palace master did not say anything else to avoid dampening their enthusiasm. Everyone quieted down and the divine cruiser continued forward. About 4 hours later, the fifth palace master, who had been closing his eyes and casting spells to scan the surroundings, suddenly frowned. He had used a mystic technique to detect that there was a godly king's aura on his left. It was approaching at an extremely fast speed. The two were hundreds of thousands of miles apart. While the godly king was flying rapidly, he had also cast spells to conceal his aura and tracks. However, the fifth palace master was a god emperor, so he could naturally see through the godly king's disguise. As the fifth palace master searched, he could detect the aura of a godly king every few 100,000 miles. However, they were all vicious beasts and divine beasts. The aura just now was different. It was definitely not a divine beast or vicious beast, but a desolate race creature. Ever since the fifth palace master entered the core region of the unknown lands, he had not encountered any creatures other than the beast race. Now, in the most dangerous region, he had encountered a desolate race godly king. Furthermore, that person was rushing from the east to the west, coming face to face with the fifth palace master. How could the fifth palace master not be surprised? He felt that something was amiss, so he immediately ordered his confidants to change directions and steer the divine cruiser to chase after the desolate race godly king. Under the control of his confidants, the divine cruiser rapidly changed directions and accelerated. In a few seconds it had caught up to its target. The divine cruiser did not appear rashly, nor did it launch an attack. The fifth palace master secretly left the divine cruiser and personally cracked the desolate race godly king's disguise, stopping him. Moments later, the divine cruiser, the fifth palace master and the desolate race godly king of unknown origins stopped in midair. When the desolate race godly king appeared, everyone could see his appearance clearly. He was indeed a genuine desolate race godly king. However, his clothes were ragged and his hair was unkempt. He looked rather pathetic and weathered. Although this sloppy desolate race godly king appeared extremely vigilant and alert, the fifth palace master did not give any explanation. He did not give him a chance to resist. He used the means of a god emperor expert to easily capture him and bring him back to the divine cruiser. Swish! With a flash of divine light, the fifth palace master returned to the divine cruiser's hull. He casually threw the sloppy desolate race godly king to the ground. Following that, the fifth palace master elegantly sat on his throne and looked down at him from above. 4 golden armored guard captains and 20 silver armored elite guards stood in 2 rows in the hall. Their eyes were focused on the sloppy godly king. Logically speaking, under such circumstances and atmosphere, the sloppy godly king would definitely feel fear. However, he was the exact opposite. When he saw the layout of the divine cruiser and the emblems on the guard's armor, not only did he not feel fear, he even revealed a look of pleasant surprise. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. Without waiting for the fifth palace master to inquire about his identity, he took the initiative to kneel on one knee in front of the fifth palace master. He bowed his head and said respectfully, "Descendant of the Rain Cruiser Hall, City Patrol Guard Ding Lang greets the Lord. If I may be so bold as to ask, the Lord is?" It turned out that the sloppy ghost that the fifth palace master had met was Ding Lang, who had just obtained his freedom. Before he was captured by the beast race as a slave, he was a citizen of the Rain Cruiser Hall under the Kongming Temple. He was also a city patrol guard. Hence he could recognize the unique emblems of the Kongming Temple. He guessed that the divine cruiser was a cruiser from the Kongming Temple headquarters. As for the black-robed expert who had captured him, he was a cultured and refined middle-aged man. He looked powerful and mysterious. Ding Lang could not help but make a bold guess. This expert was definitely an important figure in the temple. Chapter 45-41. At this moment, Ding Lang realized that he was saved. In this dangerous area, he was extremely lucky to be able to meet a big shot from the Temple of Emptiness. As long as he revealed his identity, the other party would not leave him in the lurch. In this way, he would have a chance to escape unscathed and successfully leave the unknown land. Therefore, he took the initiative to reveal his identity with such a respectful attitude. However, the fifth palace master did not realize what surprise and turn of events he was facing. He only felt that it was a little strange. "You're Ding Lang? A citizen of Yueshing Hall and a city patrol guard? Then why are you here? And in such a sorry state?" The fifth palace master looked down at Ding Lang and raised a series of questions with a frown. Although he did not answer Ding Lang's questions and did not introduce himself, Ding Lang was not stupid. He was even more certain that the other party was an important person from Kongming Temple. Therefore, he stopped probing and asking about the other party's identity. He went with the flow and explained, "My lord, this is a long story." Ding Lang had already thought of an excuse and was prepared to tell the other party about his miserable experience. However, the fifth palace master raised his eyebrows and said with a cold expression, "Then make it short." "Yes, my lord." Ding Lang was stunned and could only choose to use short words to explain the cause and process. 100 years ago, I went to the unknown land to search for treasures and was captured by the Beast clan. They took me to Li City and made me a slave. I worked day and night in a refiner's workshop. Until yesterday, when the 100 years were up, the Beast clan let me go. After listening to Ding Lang's story, the entire hall fell silent. Not only was the fifth palace master looking at him with a strange expression, even the surrounding guards had different expressions and complicated looks in their eyes. For a moment, Ding Lang was at a loss and did not know what had gone wrong. In the end, it was the fifth palace master who spoke first and broke the silence. "In front of me, you dare to make up nonsense and say such ridiculous things. Do you want to die?" The 20 guards and the 4 guard captains were also holding back their laughter. They looked at Ding Lang with a look of schadenfreude. Obviously, no one believed Ding Lang's words. And Ding Lang's focus was entirely on the 2 words "this emperor." In the entire Kongming Temple, there were only 5 God Emperor level experts, and all of them were temple masters. According to the rumors, the 5 palace masters had different appearances and temperaments. The cultured and refined black-robed man in front of him was most likely the youngest 5th palace master. Of course, Ding Lang guessed the identity of the other party, yet he didn't dare expose it. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and kowtowed as he said, "My lord, calm your anger. Everything this subordinate said is true, and I absolutely don't dare deceive you in the slightest." The 5th palace master furrowed his brows and observed Ding Lang for a moment. Through Ding Lang's expression and aura fluctuations, the 5th palace master was certain that Ding Lang was not lying. However, he was still skeptical and asked, "Those ignorant ferocious beasts and divine beasts didn't kill you after capturing you. Instead, they brought you back as a slave? Also, what do you mean by Li City? Don't tell me that those savage beasts actually know how to build a capital city?" "Oh right, Didn't you just say that after they capture you they will make you a slave in the armament workshop? Ah. A bunch of wild beasts know how to refine armaments. You really have an imagination. Infected by the fifth palace master's laughter, the 20-odd guards also laughed out loud. Ding Lang was very helpless. He only wanted to say in his heart, "What do I have to do to make you believe me?" However, the actual situation didn't allow him to say that. He could only think quickly, racking his brains to think of all kinds of words, and try his best to describe what he saw and heard in Li City in detail. The fifth palace master still had a mocking smile on his face, and he was skeptical of Ding Lang's words. However, Ding Lang was not moved at all, nor did he show any fear. He continued to tell his story as he pleased. As time passed, he talked endlessly for half a day and actually restored the general appearance of Li City. The fifth palace master and the 20-odd guards also had a corresponding image in their minds. Everyone gradually accepted this absurd fact and even began to think, are the ferocious beasts and divine beasts really going to awaken? If that so-called Li City really existed, the Beast clan would have already started to build houses and palaces, learn to set up arrays and refine armaments. What were they trying to do? Were they trying to strengthen themselves and fight against the Kongming Temple, or even invade the Kongming Temple's territory? Thinking of this, the fifth palace master also felt a sense of danger in the depths of his heart. In the end, when Ding Lang mentioned the two leaders of the Beast clan, the two God Emperor-level divine beasts and the ferocious beasts, and described their appearances, the fifth palace master gradually believed him. Firstly, the fifth palace master could tell that Ding Lang's expression and state didn't seem to be lying. Secondly, Ding Lang in his agitated state had said at least 1,000 words to describe the situation in Li City and to support his previous words. After the fifth palace master's summary and analysis, he actually couldn't find any loopholes or contradictions. This also proved that Ding Lang was indeed not lying. As for the third point, the key was the two God Emperor-level ferocious beasts. This was one of the Kongming Temple's secrets. As early as tens of thousands of years ago, there were indeed a few palace masters who led many elite experts into the unknown lands. They encountered all kinds of dangers and suffered losses to the extent that they were almost completely wiped out. Later on, a few palace masters did indeed encounter God Emperor-level ferocious beasts. However, they were very cautious. They only sensed the aura of the two Emperor-level ferocious beasts from afar and quickly retreated without meeting them. Otherwise, if both sides met and fought, the consequences would be unpredictable. Although those palace masters brought back rich cultivation resources and treasures of heaven and earth, which laid the foundation for the Kongming Temple to expand its power, it was an embarrassing matter. After all, it wasn't something to be proud of, so it wasn't announced to the public. In the following tens of thousands of years, even if some rumors were passed down from the Kongming Temple, they only said that there were God Emperor-level ferocious beasts in the unknown lands, but never two. Since Ding Lang dared to say that there were two God Emperor-level ferocious beasts, and one was a ferocious beast and the other was a divine beast, and he could even describe their appearances, it proved that he had indeed seen them. The fifth palace master had no choice but to believe it. The mocking expression on the fifth palace master's face disappeared, and gradually became serious and thoughtful. The 20-odd guards also realized that what Ding Lang said was true, and their expressions became solemn. Seeing that the fifth palace master was deep in thought, Ding Lang finally calmed down and stopped chattering. He quieted down and silently waited for the fifth palace master to make a decision. After a moment, the fifth palace master said, "Ding Lang, you stay on this emperor's ship. This is a serious matter, and this emperor needs to report it to the first palace master before he can make a decision. Before this emperor completes his task, you are not allowed to leave without permission, understand?" Chapter 45-42. The fifth hallmaster's words undoubtedly admitted that Ding Lang was telling the truth. While Ding Lang was feeling excited, the huge stone hanging in the air was finally lifted. Since the fifth hallmaster had decided to report the news to the first hallmaster, it proved that he attached great importance to this matter and understood the seriousness of the matter. Thinking about it this way, Ding Lang felt that he had contributed greatly. If he grasped this opportunity well, he might be able to stay by the fifth hallmaster's side and get some official position or job. Therefore he recalled the fifth hallmaster's words and immediately grasped the key point. I will obey the hallmaster's order and be on standby in the divine worship. Ding Lang respectfully kowtowed to show that he had obeyed the order. Then he gathered his courage and asked, if I may be so bold, I would like to ask why the hallmaster has come to the unknown land and appeared in the core area. I don't know what mission the hallmaster is shouldering, but if you need my help, I will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire. Originally, Ding Lang's status was very low and he had no right to inquire about the fifth hallmaster's whereabouts and plans. But he had just revealed a huge secret and gained the fifth hallmaster's trust. Plus, he was willing to serve the fifth hallmaster under the banner of sharing his worries, so asking this question did not seem out of place. The fifth hallmaster frowned and glanced at him. He did not speak, probably thinking that he had crossed the line. At this time he should have retreated respectfully and should not have said too much. But Ding Lang did not seem to notice the fifth hallmaster's displeasure. Suppressing the huge pressure in his heart, he continued to ask, Hallmaster, looking at the direction your worship is heading, it seems to be heading to Li City. It just so happens that I am familiar with the situation in this area. The fifth hallmaster could see that Ding Lang was trying to climb up the ladder. Since he had guessed Ding Lang's thoughts, he might as well tell the truth and extinguish Ding Lang's fantasy. I have to report to the first hallmaster about Li City before I can make a decision. It has nothing to do with my current mission. I came to the unknown land to hunt down a flood god emperor. He is hiding in this area. What? Are you going to tell me that you know where the flood god emperor is hiding? Or perhaps you can help this emperor find that fellow? These last two sentences, the meaning of teasing Ding Lang was very obvious. Ding Lang also had self-awareness. His old face immediately turned red and he hurriedly bowed and apologized, saying, No, this subordinate doesn't dare. This subordinate is incompetent. This subordinate has crossed the line. Please calm down, Lord Palace Master. It's good that you know. The fifth Palace Master withdrew his cold gaze and waved his hand. You may leave. Ding Lang hurriedly complied, bent his waist and prepared to leave the hall. However, as he retreated, he calmed down and suddenly thought of something. Hunting down a god emperor of the Hong clan? Hiding in this area? Could it be? It couldn't be, right? How could there be such a coincidence? Ding Lang's body trembled as he suddenly thought of something and he immediately stopped. He suddenly raised his head and gathered his courage to look at the fifth Palace Master. With a firm tone he said, Palace Master, I understand. The fifth Hall Master had just taken out his communication jade slip and was considering his words, preparing to report to the first Hall Master about leaving the capital. He did not expect Ding Lang, who had already turned to leave, to suddenly make such a move. The fifth Hall Master was also shocked. He turned to look at him and asked with a dark face, Why haven't you left? What do you know? Ding Lang had already made up his mind and was fearless. He quickly walked back to the fifth Hall Master, his eyes shining, and said in a firm tone, This subordinate knows where the flood god emperor you are looking for is. The fifth Hall Master was stunned, thinking that he had misheard. The 20 guards beside him were also dumbfounded, and they all stared at Ding Lang with their mouths agape. However, Ding Lang was not afraid. His expression was calm and he looked excitedly at the fifth Hall Master. He even dared to look him in the eyes. The fifth Hall Master finally came back to his senses. He was so angry that he laughed. He pointed at Ding Lang's nose and scolded, What a reckless fool. In order to win my trust and favor, you dare to be so presumptuous and arrogant. The 4 Hall Masters had led thousands of elites to search the unknown lands for 2 months, but they had not found any trace of the Flood God Emperor. They had not even found any useful clues. Now, a little bastard suddenly appeared and said that he knew the hiding place of the Flood God Emperor. No matter who it was, they would not believe it. This was too absurd. The 5th Hall Master thought that Ding Lang was too eager for quick success and was too impetuous. Today he must punish this person and let him know the consequences. When the surrounding guards saw the 5th Hall Master angry, their hearts were in their mouths and their expressions became solemn. However, Ding Lang was not afraid at all. He looked at the 5th Hall Master with bright eyes and said in a serious tone, 5th Hall Master, although this matter is very coincidental, this subordinate hopes that you can calm down. After you hear this subordinate's explanation, you can decide whether to believe it or not. What do you think? It was probably because Ding Lang's performance was too firm, and it did not seem like he was lying. Or maybe, the matter of Li City he had mentioned before had given the fifth hall master a foundation of trust. When the fifth hall master saw his demeanor and heard his clear words, he subconsciously nodded his head in agreement. Speak if you lie even half a word, this emperor will not forgive you. Ding Lang's heart was surging with excitement. He had another chance to show off and fight for glory and wealth. However, he tried his best to keep calm and said methodically, although this subordinate does not know what happened before or when the divine hall began to hunt down the flood god emperor, I have been in Li City for a long time. However, this subordinate had been staying in Li City all this time and was only released last night. And half a month ago this subordinate heard the beasts in the Li City discussing that not long ago, a god emperor powerhouse of another race was invited to the Li City by the two old ancestors. That foreign god emperor could not only create things out of thin air, but also built a divine palace in Li City and preached on the Tao in the square outside the palace. Every day several thousand beasts would go to listen to his preaching. Many beasts were enlightened and their realms advanced by leaps and bounds. Moreover, the foreign god emperor also taught those beasts the skills of alchemy, refining and setting up formations, teaching them how to live and cultivate. Although Ding Lang was trapped in the workshop and could not leave when he was in Li City, he had never seen Ji Tianqing with his own eyes. However, in the past half a month, the entire Li City was talking about Ji Tianqing's preaching and teaching. When Ding Lang was working, he often heard other beasts talking about it, so of course he remembered it. After the fifth hall master finished listening to Ding Lang's story, he was stunned on the spot. When he came back to his senses, he was already full of surprise and excitement. His body trembled with excitement and he could not help but exclaim, "Is this true? Seeing that hope is slim, there is actually such a turning point. This is simply a gift from the heavens, an incomparable coincidence and luck." You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.